The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because, as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, good morning to you and happy Friday. I hope it's a pleasant where you are. Lots to chew over today in the news. What is going on with this new revitalisation of our health services? Have we seen this all before? Oh, yes, top-down restructuring. Wes Streeting promised he wouldn't do it. People are saying it's going to be a distraction, but is cutting 10,000 management jobs exactly the best medicine? I think it probably is. Not that I'm queuing myself up to, shower praise all over Sir Keir Starmer, but we'll be digging into that. Also, why have sickness benefits soared so much under Labour? The statistics are absolutely eye-watering. Over 1 million people, I think it's 1.8 million people, are now on sickness benefits. And yet, just before the pandemic, that wasn't even that long ago, it was around 300,000. Why is everybody now just not working, sitting at home, moaning about being poorly or mentally ill? And how do we reverse that phenomenon? And why on earth is this government so addicted to China? The commies just can't leave the commies alone, can they? First it was David Lammy, then it was Rachel Reeves, now it's Ed Miliband, who is bimbling over to Beijing to grease the palms of the CCP. And you think to yourself, what on earth do you think you're doing at the time that America is saying clearly we need to face down the anti-Western axis, that we have been warned by security services for so long that Chinese has improper motivations for wanting to help construct our infrastructure? Oh no, Ed Miliband is there probably to roll out the communist red carpet to anybody from China who wants to, I don't know, build wind farms or nuclear power stations. Hand them a giant charity cheque of UK goodwill when it comes to climate change while they continue to build coal-fired power stations. It makes a mockery of our geopolitical strategy, which should be the rich seam of intelligence that runs through every single government department. Right, I want to know your thoughts on everything we're talking about today. The number to call if you'd like to have a chinwag with me on air, which would be wonderful. 0344 499 1000. That costs your national standard network rate. You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp as well. 0344 499 1000. Ping ping me over your thoughts and comments. Even ping me over a cheeky little voice note if you so wish, because I can then play it out on air. 8722 is the number. If you'd rather use good old-fashioned text message, remember to write the word talk before your text. That way it pings the cell phone masts on the top of Talk Towers. We're on X at talkTV. Right, let's jump straight to it, shall we, and talk about this restructuring of the National Health Service. To give you a little overview of what is in store, it's called the world's biggest quango by Sir Keir Starmer. He says he's getting rid of it. He's abolishing NHS England, basically saying that all the people that he's going to sack from there, 10,000 of them, no less, are basically just doubling up of the work of civil service bureaucrats in the Department of Health and Social Care anyway. And those who are kept will just be moved into the Department for Health and Social Care over the next 2 years. Now, this is going to save us a fair whack of money, apparently, because NHS England has an annual budget of £192 billion. Of course, a lot of money will be spent on giving people massive payouts. The last time this happened, they sacked a load of NHS managers, giving them golden handshakes to go to pastures new. They ended up going back to pastures old. What a waste of time and money that was. Let's drill down into this in a little bit more detail with Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism. Mark, it's great to have you on the programme. Now, I'm always a fan of bonfires of the quangos, but that's not really what the Labour Party's doing. It might be scrapping NHS England, but when it comes to other quangos, they've been on a bit of a quango creation spree, haven't they?
Yeah, Alex, that's right. You said a few minutes ago that you're not minded to shower Keir Starmer with praise. I'm not minded to shower him with praise either, but I might sprinkle a few drops of praise on him, actually, for this NHS England thing. It is the biggest quango. I'm glad it's going. We can argue about how we would like healthcare provision in Britain to be provided in future. Do we think it should all be provided by the government and the health minister, or do we think that we should have more people in private care? But insofar as you're going to have a National Health Service, I want it run by the Health Secretary, not some quango. I was actually talking to a former Health Secretary a couple of weeks ago, who said it was a nightmare working with NHS England. You couldn't even get any information out of them. So I'm quite glad that it's going to be Wes Streeting and his successors whose heads are going to be on the block if the NHS goes wrong, rather than this detached quango. But Alex, you're right. I think that Labour has created 27, is it, new quangos since coming to office in July. So it's sort of one step forward, 20-odd steps back, unfortunately.
Well, this is it. The quango body count at present is apparently over 300,000 employees. The biggest one was NHS England, RIP. Next down is Education and Skills Funding Agency. What do they do?
Very good question. If you go through all of these different quangos, you can usually guess a little bit by the name. I think we finally, a few years ago, scrapped the British Potato Council. I think they were something to do with making sure that potato blight didn't occur. So the skills and training stuff will be to try and assist people with skills and training. Generally speaking, what these quangos are trying to do is not of itself nuts. The problem is that they are completely unaccountable to Parliament. So we get into the odd position in which our politicians think that they're in government to sort of pull levers and push buttons, but actually they're just sort of pushing string. They can't get anything done. So I'd like to go through all of them. I think there's north of 400, probably getting towards 500 of these quangos, these quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organisations who aren't really answerable to anybody. I'd like to go through the lot of them, either abolish each one or privatise each one. Perhaps there are some that could stand on their own 2 feet if they were supported by the sector that they actually operate in, or if there are key functions they do, bring those into government departments. So that's what's happening with NHS England. But as I say, that's one out of more than 400. Let's go through the whole list.
I cannot believe it's that many, Mark. Seriously, that is absolutely obscene. I've actually got the list in front of me of the sort of top 8 or so. And after NHS England, bye-bye, you've got Education and Skills Funding Agency. Lord knows what that does that the Department of Education doesn't do. Revenue and Customs. Well, we know what they do. I have my brush with them every year. Wouldn't mind if they go, but that probably won't ever happen. Network Rail, and we've had a lot of them in recent years. UK Research and Innovation. I mean, I do like the idea of investing into research and innovation and our sort of body of brilliance when it comes to technology and science that we've been, joint world leaders for a number of years. But you kind of think, do they really need 9.3 billion quid? Then, of course, coming in after them, my absolute favourite of them all, HS2. HS2 at £6.9 billion. It's mental. HS2, honestly, I get such a bee in my bonnet about HS2. I once sat there and meticulously made a flowchart of since HS2 was announced to today, where it still frankly doesn't exist, all the other things that have been invented. And it's basically all the social media platforms, Zoom conversations, half of Dubai's been built, and China's built the entirety of its own 2,000 kilometre odd high-speed rail across the entire country. And we've spent billions of pounds just talking about a train line that's going to go from some station in London no one's heard of to Birmingham, cut about 10 minutes off the journey when nobody commutes for work anyway anymore.
Alex, I share your despair. HS2 would definitely be one that I would put entirely on the chopping block rather than salvage at all. I think it was when was it that India spent, I think, £100 million getting an unmanned flight to Mars? So the Indians are spending 100 million getting to Mars. We were planning on spending 100 billion getting to Birmingham. Doesn't seem to be a particularly good use of funds or money. And then the other interesting thing you get, of course, if you go deeper and deeper into this list of quangos, Alex, is often they're at war with each other. So even if HS2 were being able to actually sort of lay some track and move a bit beyond just Zoom calls and the rest of it and planning, and I think they spent a lot on Lego, didn't they, to recreate what one of the stations would look like, you'll have other quangos that are getting in their way. The infamous bat tunnel that we had to spend an absolute fortune, was it tens of millions of pounds to build a tunnel over some part of HS2 to protect bats. I think it came in at £500,000 for each bat saved. Rather better care and treatment and money than we throw at keeping people alive on the National Health Service. So, yeah, let's go through the whole list. I feel your pain too, Alex, on Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. Bad news is I think we're probably not going to get rid of the tax collector. There is a question about shouldn't they just be part of the Treasury Department rather than some independent quango? So if things go wrong or it's too difficult to get through on the phone, that it's the Chancellor of the Exchequer or one of the Chancellor's ministers who's directly responsible for it. So I hope this isn't a one-off with NHS England. I hope we do now start to go methodically through the list. But as we've already alluded to, unfortunately, even if you make a surprise announcement to kill one quango, 2 or 3 others seem to pop up almost every week.
Well, it must have occurred to some sort of sharp-brained listeners that NHS England operated only to manage the health services in England, and frankly we can do without it, which to me leads me very neatly down the logical path of, well, why do we need all the devolved ones? In fact, why do we need devolution? Surely the biggest quangos in the world are the government of Wales and the government of Scotland.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, we've done devolution in a pretty cack-handed way, really, not just at the Scottish and Welsh level, but at the mayoral level as well. We've typically set up either these parliaments or these mayoral offices, not really to take big decisions about tax and spend in their areas, but to be the most effective begging bowl they can be for Westminster. So I wouldn't have too much problem with devolution if at local level you are making the hard choice, the hard trade-off choice about whether you wanted to tax more to spend more on public services or tax a bit less and allow more money to reside in the pockets of your residents. But tax and spend decisions, I think 95% of all tax and spending decisions are made at Westminster. If you're going to have that amount of tax and spend made at Westminster, it's a bit of a head scratcher about why you need different bodies. But if we were actually to give proper tax and spending powers and perhaps some regulatory powers to local, regional level or even to the nations, well, then it could work. But what we've actually done is to set up these bodies really to press Westminster, to lobby Westminster for more and more funding. So devolution has not worked as it should have done and was always badly designed.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see the back of those ridiculous parliaments, that's for sure. Let's talk now about Ed Miliband, because he's gone off to China. He's gone off to lobby them to shore up support for multilateral climate action, especially after the US has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. Do you think Xi Jinping is sitting there in China going, oh, well, you know, now Trump's doing drill, baby, drill. We better not use our own fossil fuels. We better, like, get on the net zero train and self-flagellate at the altar of wokery and kill off our industry? I doubt it. I mean, what on earth is he playing at?
Yeah, my guess would be, not that I'm particularly well connected to the Chinese Communist Party, you'll be glad to hear, Alex, but my guess would be that they think when they see Ed Miliband that there is a sucker born every minute. If we wish to continue on the economic suicide mission of carbon net zero by 2050, guess what? The Chinese communists will be extremely happy to help us along that pathway of self-destruction, to sell us the kit that we need in order to build more solar, wind, or whatever. So I'm highly skeptical that the Chinese themselves are going to do anything to lower carbon emissions. In fact, if you were to look at a graph of likely carbon emissions over the next 20 or 30 years, the UK basically flatlines and falls off a little, and we're already less than 1% of global carbon emissions. So it makes precious little difference, actually, what happens to carbon emissions in the UK. And China just zooming upwards in terms of carbon emissions. So rather curious destination for Ed Miliband, but I'm unsurprised that the Chinese communists will be welcoming him in open arms.
Why wouldn't they? I mean, it's utterly mad. This is a huge divergence from American foreign policy. And Sir Keir Starmer seems to sort of, you know, been trotting over to the White House going, we've got our special relationship, looking at Donald Trump like a sad, snickering little sycophant, touching him like this. Oh, Donald, please love me. And then he's sending off his little weasel Miliband to go and sign checks for China to basically destroy our own industries. And they're predatory mercantilists. We know this. You couldn't make the madness up. Now, before I let you go, sickness benefits have gone on steroids under Labour. Now, in theory, nothing has actually changed in the way that sickness benefits are allocated or judged. But for some reason, more than 1.8 million people are now on the highest rate of universal credit with no support to look for work. And that's compared with 360,000 at the start of the pandemic in early 2020. So that's increased by nearly 70%. I mean, that's mad. Almost 2,000 people every day are being judged too sick to work and are now being placed on this highest rate of universal credit. What's going on?
Yeah, well, I mean, Alex, it's an economic problem here, not a health problem. If you pay more and more people to be sick, guess what? More and more people will officially be sick. I think it's also particularly, we see the rise in mental health problems, which I'm not hand-waving away. Some people do have serious mental health problems, but they are obviously notoriously harder to diagnose and judge than a physical health problem. You can clearly show if somebody's got a heart problem or broken a leg or requires cancer treatment. The extent to which you're depressed, is it mild, is it moderate, is it severe, much more contestable. So if you have a system in which it is relatively easy and becoming easier to sign off sick, because one of the things that has changed radically since the pre-COVID era is we're doing much less checking up on people to see whether they really are still ill or still unfit for work. Well, then more and more people are going to be on sickness benefit. I mean, I think of the working age population now, we're getting towards 3 million people of working age who, for one reason or another, are unable to work at all. I'm not talking about people who are off ill for a week or so because they've got flu. I'm talking about people who literally cannot work at all because they are so ill. Well, I mean, that's sort of, 10% of the working population. So ill, so afflicted that they can't possibly consider doing any work in anything like the medium term. Something has gone horrifically wrong here. So I think we've got to change the way that we do these sort of medical checkups. I'm not suggesting that sort of doctors and GPs are in on this. They're not. But if a patient comes to see a GP and says, oh, I've got this problem and that problem, it's very easy for the GP just to sign them off. Why have a fight about it? It's not their money. It's not their company who's losing an employee to sickness benefits. So we've probably got to tighten that up somewhat. And you've got to have a much better incentive to actually get to work. If you make it relatively easier and relatively more attractive to sit on your sofa at home and relatively less attractive to get up and go to the office, guess what? We'll have more people sitting on the sofa, and that's exactly what we've got.
Well, exactly. It is human nature, one can say. I remember the good old days when you'd have photographs in tabloid newspapers of someone who said they had a bad back going on a bungee jump. The naming and shaming of benefits fraud. Where did those days go? Mark Littlewood, fantastic having you on, the programme director of Popular Conservatism. Right, before we go to break, let's have a cheeky little voice note. And before we play the voice note, just remind you that coming up after the break is your opportunity to share your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to dial it now, and you will be screened appropriately and hopefully patched through to the studio. You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp as well. 0344 499 1000. 8722 is the number on text. Remember to like the word talk before your message. And now take it away, Nigel from Peebles. What a great place.
Morning, Alex. Nigel from Peebles. You're absolutely right about devolution being the biggest quango. Just looking at Scotland, 156 MSPs that 25 years ago we didn't have, plus all their expenses, plus all their secretaries, plus all their special advisors, plus. Absolute lunacy. And we've still got the Scottish MPs in Westminster. Scrap the lot of it. Scrap everything. We can't afford it.
There you go, Nigel from Peebles. I totally agree. Is Peebles in Scotland, does anyone know? I've never heard of Peebles. I quite want to go there. Sounds whimsical, doesn't it? Going on a little day trip to Peebles today. But there you go. I mean, I've come to this realisation lately that devolution is just fraud. When you're a country of 65 million, we're at the same size as one single US state. Why do we need all these other governments? It's an absolute madness. Get it all done from Westminster. Cut the size of MPs as well. Pay them more money and get rid of these joke shop glorified county councils in other countries. Right, going to take a short break now, but when I come back, it's your opportunity to get in touch. Looking forward to hearing from you after this.
I was delighted to hear that the Financial Conduct Authority have just decided, taking a bit of a while, that they are no longer going to implement their equality, diversity and inclusion project. We know that is a corrosive impact on workplaces. Why don't the government, if Starmer wants my kind of seal of approval, he could stand up and say we're going to get rid of every extraneous politicised role in the civil service, like EDI schemes.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker. On your smart TV. And on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello. Right, sorry, I just had a bit of like, I was recovering from a cold. I almost lost my voice for a second there, but I've got it back, thankfully, because I've still got about 2.5 hours to go. Be a boring 2.5 hours if I just sat here coughing alone. Right, 03444991000 is the number to call or to send me a WhatsApp message with your thoughts on any of the stories we're talking about today. 8722 is the number to text me. Right, talk before your text. Right, here we go. Glyn from Grantham says, morning, princess. I like that. I like princess. I'd rather be sort of, upgraded to empress, by the way, but I'll take princess for now. Hope you have a great show. Oh, thank you. I give you one reason why people are on benefits. It's because of waiting years for surgeries, leaving them with other problems, waiting to get operations. That's true, actually. There must be a backlog of people who are sort of, the elected surgeries that are all being pushed back, that when the doctors were going on strike, when things were shut down for COVID, with these huge waiting lists, people who probably want to get to work, but they cannot get the medical treatment they need to be able to go back into the workplace. Stephen Cambridge says, morning, Alex, you gorgeous creature. Oh, thank you, creature. British people are sick to death with the bad management of our country. If you work, they tax you to death. So many are saying, sod that, I'll get lots back. I know what you mean. It just, when you were just constantly rinsed all the time by the state, where you find at, the end of every financial year, you're like, oh, here you go. 50% of all my hard work goes in the pockets of people who have just turned up on boats or have some sort of confected mental health issue, or worse still, a part of some sort of, Eastern European gang that is defrauding our system for millions of pounds. And yet here I am coughing up the cash for you, and I can't even get through on telephone tombola to the GP. Yeah, you do start questioning your life choices. Morning, Alex, says Chris. How is Miliband getting to China? Is he going by a sailing boat? As he is so against us flying, what a joke this numpty is. Let me guess he's not going by boat. If he was, I'd absolutely love it. It might get stuck in that canal like that evergreen thing, whatever it's called. Do you remember that? When all the stuff from China couldn't get to Britain because there was some sort of girt cargo ship like wedged in a canal. Oh, those are the fun news days, weren't they? Right, now talking about news, other news out today that I want to really riff upon here. A UN judge, right, has been convicted of forcing a woman to work as a slave. You could not make this up. This woman lived in Oxfordshire. Lydia Mugambi took advantage of her status over her victim, preventing her holding down steady employment while forcing her to work as a maid. She's a High Court judge in Uganda, but also is a UN judge. She's going to be sentenced at Oxford Crown Court. Apparently, she decided she wanted to have someone come and wash her dishes and wipe her backside and do all of this stuff. So she plucked some girl out of her native country, said that she had to be brought over for other reasons, aka trafficked her, got rid of her travel documents as far as I'm aware, and then basically didn't even pay her. So took her as a slave. No doubt when this goes to court, Oxford Crown Court will say, well, do you know what? It's cultural differences, isn't it? It's well, they do that over there, so perhaps she should be let off. This woman works for the UN. So her trial heard that she had the intention of obtaining someone to make her life easier and at the least possible cost to herself. Yeah, that's called a slave. She denied forcing the young Ugandan woman to do household chores and said she always treated her with love, care and patience. The young woman that was tricked into coming to the UK, she can't be named for legal reasons, told the court she felt lonely and stuck after her working hours were limited. Now, according to Ms Mugambi's UN profile page, she was appointed to the body's judicial roster in May 2023. This was 3 months after the police went to her address in Oxfordshire. I mean, do some checks and balances with your UN, not that you do that when it comes to UNRWA, basically giving money to Hamas. Right, let's go to the phone lines now and speak to Michelle, who's in London. Hi, Michelle.
Oh, good morning, Alex. Thank you so much for taking my call. It's very annoying when people are discussing mental health. I've had mental health for over 30 years, but it never stopped me from working. Your doctor always told you never tell anybody, especially your work, that you've got mental health. I got mental health for a few tragedies, but along my life, if I had a bad back, I had an MRI and it told me exactly what was wrong with my back. With your mental health, I'm quite severe now. I've got PSP and a few other things, you know, like life doesn't treat you cool, but you still get up and brush yourself down. I don't get benefits from my mental health. I get it through my physical health.
Yeah. You make a really good point. I think as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, very often when people are suffering from things, you know, some people have mental health, poor mental health, which is linked to chemical, hormonal imbalances in their bodies, others linked to things that they have gone through in life, and some people have been through horrific stuff, and you have to give them time and space to be able to recover. But for a lot of people, I think especially a lot of young people, they're just trapped in this sort of doom loop of thinking they've got poor mental health, when actually what really helps, and this is what I want to ask you about, is if I'm feeling a little bit depressed and sad and I think, oh, I can't be bothered, I want to roll over in bed, I'm going to have a pyjama day, I'm just going to watch TV. By the time it rolls around to the evening, I feel even worse than when I woke up. Whereas, you know, when I was a kid at school, my mum would say, go to school, you'll cheer up when you see all your friends, when you're with your friends, you'll feel a lot better. And the truth is, for a lot of people, that is the case. They're having purpose and industry and mingling with other human beings, socialising, doing work is actually a great fillip to one's particular constitution.
No, you're right on everything you said there, because when you have when you're feeling a bit down, this is where people have to separate. If you've got anxiety, that's not a mental health. If you get up one morning and you feel, oh, I've had enough, you're a bit off. Everybody has an off day. But the thing is, there's nothing like being around people. You've got people telling you different stories, and, you know, it makes your day because you're communicating, and funny enough, you can give out good advice.
Right, exactly. People pay a lot of money for therapists, don't they? And I think it can be a bit hit and miss. That's not if you're a therapist listening, I'm sure a very good one. But also to speaking to other people and sharing things we've gone through. It's a form of catharsis. It really does help. Although yesterday when I phoned up my boyfriend in the morning and I'm just like, oh God, you know, this has happened and that's happened, and, you know, I've got to sort out this and this paperwork and bureaucracy and hold music. My memoir, I think, is going to be My Life on Hold, because I feel like most of my existence is phoning some sort of failure to function properly government department, HMRC or something like that, trying to sort out something they should have sorted out long ago. I sort of moaned to him and he just went, I can't be bothered listening to this. He's like, no, don't hear it, sorry, not interested. And so I just hung up and went, fine, I'm going to go and moan to Ted, my producer at work, instead. And Ted looks very scarred from that, I'm sure. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere. When I come back, we're going to be talking about the latest with Putin, the peace deal, and Trump, with Cormac Smith, former advisor to the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry. That's coming up after this.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Well, the latest in discussions over Ukraine. Apparently, America has reached out to Moscow and said, here you go, I've got Ukraine to agree to their side. They want an immediate ceasefire. Ball's in your court, Mr. Putin. And I think, as to be expected, Mr. Putin has said, well, OK, you know, we like the idea of a ceasefire, but it's got to be on my terms. And his terms, all the things that he's been saying for the best part of forever. And, well, I don't think it's really going to plan, but can Trump win it back? Let's speak to Cormac Smith, former advisor to the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry. Cormac, great to have you back on the programme. Now, I know that you have been sort of, you know, relatively, I think you've been relatively supportive of the idea of trying to get something sorted out and not continue with this war of attrition. And Zelensky has been brought to the table and now seems to say, OK, fine, we're going to go along with what America's saying. But Putin isn't doing the same, is he?
No, he's not. Good morning, Alex. It's nice to join you as usual. Look, you're quite right. I am supportive of something that would bring this horrible genocidal war and the killing and suffering that goes along with it to an end. But it cannot be peace at any cost. And actually, it doesn't matter at the end of the day what my view is. It's the view of the Ukrainian people. I think Vladimir Putin's response so far has been absolutely predictable. He seems to have crafted his response in a way that it cannot be interpreted as an absolute no to Donald Trump, which he would not want to do. But of course, his demands are remaining absolutist. Not only does he want to keep all the land that he already has, but he wants to take the parts of the four oblasts that he annexed in 2022. And including two cities, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. He wants to take those also. He is making demands that if there is a ceasefire, during the ceasefire, the Ukrainian army should not be able to resupply or to do anything. Well, does that apply to the Russian army as well? He will be demanding that Ukraine's army be effectively neutered, leaving Ukraine vulnerable for when he wants to come back later, which he undoubtedly will, given a chance. And he is putting out an absolute no to European forces on the ground to keep any peace. So I think we knew what Putin was going to say. The unknown now is how Donald Trump will react to the Russian stance, because there is a big question mark, certainly there has been in my mind for a long time, about whether Trump is in Putin's pocket or not, i.e. does Putin actually have something on Trump?
Oh, interesting. The compromat question comes up again, because it does, from all outside perspectives, look rather much like he has sort of acquiesced to Putin's power. And Putin, in return, seems to be saying, well, look, I've invaded Ukraine and I want to keep what I've got, and there to be absolutely zero repercussions. No foreign peacekeepers, as you said, a ban on NATO membership for Ukraine. Ukraine having to limit the size of its army, basically opening up the door in future, when Donald Trump's no longer president, for one imagines Russia going back in and taking more of what they've already got. What do you think of the ideas of Polish President Andrzej Duda, who has basically said a way around this for us, or a way around this as a deterrent, could be for American nuclear weapons to be stationed in Poland?
Well, this is alarming for any of us in Western Europe who have had the luxury of growing up taking peace and security for granted, isn't it? But, you know, I've been saying since I went out to Ukraine in 2016 that we need to see Russia through Ukrainian eyes and the eyes of the other people in the eastern neighborhood, in particular the Baltics and the Poles. So, of course, Mr. Duda is asking that American nuclear weapons be positioned on Polish soil as a deterrent. This will shock many, many people, no doubt. But what I would say, you and I, Alex, you're a little bit younger than I am, I think, but we certainly grew up in the period of mad, mutually assured destruction. And that was the concept that neither side would use their nukes because it would mean obliteration for both. I would quote one of our own military men, the current head of the British Army, who said before Christmas that the British Army isn't ready to fight, and if we're not ready to fight, we're not ready to deter. Somebody else once said the best way to avoid war is preparing for war. So, Putin must be deterred with strength. So I think the point the Polish president is making is that he wants maximum deterrence. And they understand, they grew up with this, they understand that the only language that Russia understands is strength, and that is the only way that they can deter. So I find it alarming, but having spent 11 years now working with people in that part of the world, I can understand where he is coming from.
Now,
we're currently...
Yes, I was going to say, the thing is, right, so we've got Steve Witkoff, who's over there, the envoy to Moscow, having conversations with the representatives of Russia. Trump saying they're in very serious discussions. But the difficulty we've got is, where do we now go to apply sanctions on Russia? How much further can we stretch? How much more can be done? Because at the moment, Trump seems to be busying himself with what appears to be applying financial sanctions on Europe through some of his tariffs. And Russia, I'm not sure what the approach is. He simply said that he hopes Russia will do the right thing. Well, guess what? If Putin's given a choice between doing the wrong thing and getting away with it and doing the right thing and not getting anything out of it, we know what he's going to take.
Alex, been a professional communicator for most of my life. I love my sound bites. And the first sound bite that I developed and deployed as early as January 2022, when I started doing interviews, was arm Ukraine to the teeth and sanction Russia back to the Stone Age. If that had been done, I believe we could have seen the end of the war by the end before 2023, certainly after the fall of Kherson in late 22. We haven't done it. Now, Donald Trump has the ability to do that. The Russian economy is in free fall. He could break Russia's back economically, and he could flood Ukraine with the sort of weapons that they have been crying out for, that they still do not have enough of. Will he do that? I doubt it very much. But as I started off by saying, it's very easy, or at least I found it easy to know or to predict what Vladimir Putin would say. What I'm finding it much harder to predict at the moment is what Donald Trump will say and do when Putin does not play ball with him. Will he ultimately stand up to Putin?
That is the big question, isn't it? And I'm with you on that. It's really hard to say. We know where Zelensky's at. He's put his card on the table. We know where Europe is at. We know where the UK is at. And I'm pretty sure that Donald Trump is not going to want to be shown up. I don't think he's going to want to have his bluff called by Putin. And I mean, in terms of those sanctions, what is it exactly that America can do sanctions-wise? Because the problem is Russia, whatever the West decides to do against Russia, it's kind of got the tacit economic support, at least, of China, India, Brazil and South Africa, who Putin's actually turned round and thanked for their noble mission to end the fighting to casualties. I mean, we know that those countries could be potentially involved in a ceasefire deal, but the BRICS nations, so to speak, have happily been filling up Russian coffers this whole time by buying their cut price oil and gas to build their own economies, and have sort of said, well, we're staying out of this, it's our national interests first. So what is it that America can do that would really nobble Putin?
Well, look, I'm not a sanctions expert and I can't really comment on the detail, but I have been, I heard the other day that Russia's reserves are falling fast. They're down to 30 billion, which in terms of a country of 143 million people is not a lot. And of course, they are eating through huge resources and through their war effort. I think we can be assured that America has very, very significant levers and ability to hurt the Russian economy. We know, despite the support that you quoted of China and others, we know that that inflation is rocketing in across the Russian Federation. We know that the living standards of the average Russian are plummeting. I heard a statistic the other day. The average Russians now spends over 50% of their income just on food. That's medieval levels, or certainly pre-industrial age levels of consumption, leaving very, very little for, the other niceties of life. We hear stories of butter being put in security containers in shops because there was a because there was a run on people stealing butter. They really are struggling. Also on the stock exchange, we have seen the shares of major Russian companies plummeting. So there's no doubt that the collective West, with the aid of America, which we really have to have, could hurt Russia very, very much, and I think push them closer to the edge. But then that's one side is the sanctions, and I said sanctioning and then back to the Stone Age, which we've still never done. I think it was Steve Witkoff said, no, it wasn't actually. It was the man who said that Ukraine had been hit in the mouth with a lump of 2x4 recently. Said that sanctions were probably still only at a 3 out of 10 at the moment. So ridiculous. We've had an admission from the US side that an awful lot more can be done on sanctions. But the other side is, and the Ukrainians will tell us, give them all the armaments they need, give them more air defense to defend their civilians and their cities, but give them the long-range artillery and take all of the restrictions off them. That's where I would be as a friend of Ukraine. Can I see Donald Trump doing this? I'd like to think so, but I doubt it very much. But we don't know with Donald Trump. We don't know. We simply don't know.
He will want to go down in history as the man who brought peace. He's not going to want to go down in history as the man who squandered the opportunity for it. That is for sure. Cormac Smith, thank you ever so much, former advisor to the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry. Right, now, when we get back, this probably won't surprise you at all, but Rachel from Accounts knew full well that winter fuel payment cuts would plunge 150,000 OAPs into poverty. I mean, how cynical can you be to snatch a few pennies from the public purse, knowing the impact it would have on people who have spent their whole lives paying into the system? We're going to be discussing that after this.
I was delighted to hear that the Financial Conduct Authority have just decided, taking a bit of a while, that they are no longer going to implement their equality, diversity and inclusion project. We know that that is a corrosive impact on workplaces. Why don't the government, if Starmer wants my kind of seal of approval, he could stand up and say we're going to get rid of every extraneous politicised role in the civil service, like EDI schemes.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back to the show. Now, just for the break, I told you that apparently Rachel from Accounts knew full well that the winter fuel payment cuts would plunge 150,000 OAPs into poverty. Now, how do we know that she knew? Well, there has been a court case. The Court of Session is hearing a legal challenge brought by Florence and Peter Fanning from Coatbridge in Lanarkshire against last year's decision to remove the universal element of the winter fuel payment. They're being represented by former Nationalist MP Joanna Cherry KC. Now, Ms Cherry told the court the UK government's failure to carry out an equality impact assessment into the decision to cut the benefit rendered it unlawful, i.e., if we put this in place, what is the suffering likely to be? Which surely a government should do. She said her clients are elderly pensioners and have disabilities. Like most pensioners, they live on a fixed income and struggle to afford to heat their home in the winter. They're exactly the sort of people the winter fuel payment was designed to help. Now, she asked the court to consider whether UK and Scottish governments had failed to exercise their duty to carry out an equality impact assessment. Well, turns out apparently that the UK government knew it would cause significant excess winter deaths and jeopardise the health of vulnerable pensioners. Let's speak now to Chris Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Now, when we talk about things like universal welfare payments, Chris, a lot of people are minded to think, well, everything probably should be means tested. Yes, there are lots of pensioners who desperately rely on the winter fuel payment, but there are also people rattling around with massive mansion houses who give their, kids and their grandkids trust funds who probably could still pay their heating bill. But what is surprising here is the government have just sort of stripped it all back, apparently without doing the checks and balances, but were well aware that it would mean that, a vast number of pensioners could have a very chilly winter.
Well, did they know that? I mean, I think you have to be quite sceptical about economic predictions. The people who predicted this rise in pensioner poverty, are they the same people who predicted that the economy was going to grow in January and now apparently unexpectedly it's declined? Are they the same people who said there were going to be 4,000 pensioners die this winter? There have actually been fewer deaths this winter than average. This court case, in my opinion, we might disagree on this, I'm not sure, Alex. This court case sums up many of the things that's wrong with this country. You have an elected government has brought in a change to the benefit system, and they're being taken to court by a former SNP politician representing two people who live in Scotland, where the winter fuel allowance doesn't even apply, using the Human Rights Act and the Equality Act to overturn a perfectly legitimate policy. Whatever you think of the policy, this should not be a matter for human rights lawyers.
Ooh, now that, Chris, I absolutely do agree with the fact that we increasingly have sort of lawfare and litigation preventing essentially democracy. Like it or lump it, your government has the right to come in and enact a manifesto, and then we have the right to elect them out. And, the fact that when I read the name Joanna Cherry Casey, I thought to myself, quelle surprise, this is a political weapon, essentially. And actually, the other problem is it's taxpayers' money that is probably paying both sides of this situation.
Yeah, exactly. There's no chance that Joanna Cherry is going to struggle to heat her house. Human rights lawyers do very well out of this country. Everything seems to go to some sort of judicial review or some kind of appeal, and it's just wrong. I mean, we have lawyers running everything, as you've said on the show many times before. We have these ridiculous cases of illegal immigrants, convicted criminals not being able to be deported because of endless court cases, and you have endless asylum applications and reapplications. This is happening across the board. It's happening with all sorts of planning decisions, and it's even happening, as we've seen, with this, which is a very straightforward policy change. The winter fuel allowance only came in about 10 years ago. This particular change is only affecting the somewhat wealthier pensioners, and the pensioners themselves are the wealthiest generation in history. Personally, I'm in favour of dropping the winter fuel allowance. You have to remember that the triple lock pension led to pensions rising by £900 in the same year that some pensioners lost £200 or £300 from the winter fuel allowance. We can't do anything about the triple lock for political reasons. Basically, there's lots of pensioners out there and they tend to vote in disproportionate numbers. But if we can't do anything about the triple lock, we should certainly be doing something about these extra perks.
Now, talking about welfare payments, Rachel Reeves is apparently facing cabinet backlash over welfare reform. She's either going to need to increase taxes or cut public spending to fill the ever-growing, perhaps mythical, perhaps not, black hole. But we really do need to do something about the welfare system. It's gobbling up so much of the budget's bill, isn't it? But it's not really in Labour's DNA.
It's not, no. And they're going to face a lot of backbench, dissent on this, but it has to be done. We've discussed before, Alex, the scandal, really, of what's going on with incapacity benefit in this country. I'm delighted that the government recognises what many of us have been saying for the last few years, that the previous government completely messed up all the incentives in the benefit system, and you have people being pushed towards long-term incapacity benefit who are either not sick at all or only sick in the short term. It's basically much more financially rewarding to do that rather than claim job seekers allowance. It would be a massive improvement if we just go back to the previous system, which wasn't perfect, but the system of 5 or 6 years ago was significantly better than what we've got now. We've got a ridiculous number of people off sick with various different complaints, some of them real, some of them imaginary. And yeah, absolutely, the benefit system needs fixing probably as urgently as anything in this country right now. But you have to remember that pensions are also part of that benefit system, and a very large part of it.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we have been talking about the sickness benefits that have gone up to 1.8 million people now on the highest rate of universal credit with no support to look for work. And it was just 360,000 at the start of the pandemic in 2020, over 5 years. So are you saying that 70% increase is actually a hangover from Conservative government policy? Because one thing's for sure, there are people who put videos on TikTok and Instagram doing little life hacks on, if you answer these various questions these ways, you're going to get maximum sickness benefit. There are people who actually know how to play the system.
Yeah, and this system has been in place for several years now, and the longer it goes on, the more word gets around of what you need to do and what you need to say in order to claim long-term sickness. And it's a combination of people fiddling the system and perverse incentives created by the government. And you can't really blame people, really, if you allow this pathway to getting more benefits, and it makes more sense to be on benefits than to work. Obviously, people are going to respond to that.
Yeah, it's in human nature. Actually, if someone said to me, here you go, have a wedge of cash and don't bother going to work, stay at home, I'd be tempted to say thank you. That's much better. Although I do love working here, just saying. Thank you ever so much. It's always great catching up with you, Christopher Snowdon. Now, before we go to break, let's do some of your messages, because they've been coming through thick and fast, and I haven't paid enough attention to them yet, I don't believe. Someone says, Alex, is that you with your Newcastle United top on? It could be, couldn't it? I thought it was more like Breton. I thought I was looking sort of French. If I put a skein of garlic around my neck, maybe that would sort of add to the overall effect. Now, on what we were just talking about, which was welfare and sickness benefit, Paul has messaged saying, this conversation is making me so angry. My daughter had mental health issues for years. She always worked, and she ended up committing suicide. Read it, says Paul. Paul, I have read it, because it's always important to remember that it's very easy to paint broad brushstrokes and go, everyone who's on sickness benefit is a scrounger, they should be going to work. There are people with genuine medical conditions and people who we do need to wrap the arm of the state around. We're a civilised society. I wouldn't want that to change in Britain. I do believe in having a benefit system, and I think it's important that that is acknowledged, but at the same time you also have to appreciate that we've seen millions of pounds being hemorrhaged to fraud in our welfare state. Right. Liam says, I thought Ed Miliband was going to hitchhike and busk his way to China. I bet you if he turned up at that Great Wall with that ukulele, he'd probably be thrown into the Chinese equivalent of a gulag. And wouldn't we all be better off for it? Ian says, morning, Alex. I think you're a gorgeous creature as well. But then he goes on to say, that's all. I'm not interested in news anymore. All right, well, you'll be pleased to know, Ian, that coming up after the break in the next 2 hours, because you've got me until 1 o'clock, this gorgeous creature is going to be giving you more news and more views from across the week. When I come back after the break, we're going to be delving deep into the abolition of NHS England with Stephen Dorrell, who's former Health Secretary and ex-chair of the NHS Confederation. I'm back after this.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. Yeah. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr.
are not
President,
strong...
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back to the show. And in good news today, the world's biggest quango is being abolished. Woohoo! I can hear you all say, this is what we want. We want to doge up the United Kingdom. Well, apparently, Sir Keir Starmer has put the wheels in motion, scrapping NHS England. 10,000 jobs are to go as he abolishes what he described as the world's biggest quango, saying that, frankly, it doesn't need to exist because all those jobs are done by the Department of Health and Social Care anyway, and those that aren't are just going to be merged into it over the next 2 years. Which leads you to ask, why on earth this behemoth of an organisation with a £192 billion annual budget was established in the first place in 2012, apparently. It was to give the health service more operational independence from central government. But what is the point in the health service being run by the state if the state isn't running it? There's some sort of like massive, money-sucking organisations in charge. I don't know. I don't really know what NHS England do, so I'm not sure whether I should be crying into my cornflakes or popping open the early doors champagne. But someone who might be able to tell me whether or not this is a great idea, whether yet again top-down restructuring is going to be brilliant, or whether it's just going to be a distraction and actually destabilise things when the NHS is on its knees. Someone who might be able to tell me what NHS England does is Stephen Dorrell, because he's former Health Secretary and ex-chair of the NHS Confederation. Stephen, great to have you on the programme. Right, let's start at the very first obvious question, which is NHS England. Is it right to scrap it? What does it do?
So I was a sceptic of the establishment of NHS England when it was set up in 2012. The theory was that it was going to make the management of the health service independent of day-to-day political interference. I always argued that it was not only undeliverable to make the NHS separate from politics, but actually, for the reason that you hint at in your introduction, undesirable, actually. It's taxpayers' money. And even more important than the taxpayers' money, as citizens, we take an interest in the delivery of effective health policy because it goes to the very heart of what we think of as a just society. So I don't think you can take the NHS out of politics. What I do think is that before you start a bureaucratic reorganisation, which is what Keir Starmer announced yesterday, it's not a bad idea to know what the destination is that you're aiming to get to before you abolish the bit that's you're wanting to remove. We heard yesterday what they're against. We didn't hear any detail at all of how they're going to manage the health service going into the future.
How on earth, if you've also said you were sceptical about this thing being created in the first place, and no one seems to really be able to tell me quite what it does, apart from, I don't know, double up on what the Department of Health does by not being the Department of Health and therefore not, I don't know, being able to be skewed by political manifestos, which is the purpose, really, of political manifestos, you would think. £192 billion. That's a lot of money to create a load of non-jobs if they're not needed.
Well, hold on. The 192 billion is, of course, the budget of the National Health Service, I think, in England. And so the overwhelming majority of that is spent on GPs, on community health services, district nurses, and on hospitals. So that's where the money goes. What value does NHS England add into that process is that if you take that amount of money from the Treasury, you clearly need to have some machinery for trying to ensure that you prioritise expenditure in a way that delivers best value to the taxpayer. Now, that's the purpose of NHS England. Of course, there are the idea that you can't improve on performance. Well, you can improve on performance of almost every human activity, and certainly that's true of NHS England and the management of the National Health Service.
Now, what repercussions might we see from the abolition of NHS England? Because my mum used to work for the NHS for a very, very long time in admin. And it seemed to me every single time there was a change of government, some tinkering would be done. They'd change from NHS Trust to PCT to something, I don't know. I even worked at the NHS, right? I remember being there as a student doing all the admin for Agenda to Change. And I had to sort of get someone in and read through their salary details and write what their new salary band would be and give it a little stamp and on to the next bit of paperwork. And they needed to pull in extra staff to go through every single salary of every nurse and doctor and dentist and admin and all the rest of it, rebanding them. And my mum said, you know, this happens cyclically all the time, and then nothing really changes, and then it's the next big restructuring, the next top-down attempt to make the NHS more streamlined and mean and keen and lean. But is it worth it? Is this just going to destabilise the provision of NHS services at a time when, frankly, that cannot be afforded?
Well, and that's exactly my concern, that this government was elected saying there would be no top-down reorganisation. David Cameron's government was elected saying there would be no top-down reorganisation, or as a friend of mine used to say, no top-down disorganisation, which is actually closer to the truth. Now, the Cameron government launched the 2012 reforms, which led to a huge uncertainty and disruption in the healthcare system. And what was announced yesterday was another top-down disorganisation, despite the fact that the election commitment was not to have one. But the key point for me is that the NHS plan, which we were promised by the government, is not due to be published till the summer. So we're going to have a plan coming in the summer, but we already know that we need to reorganise the top management processes. Wouldn't it be a good idea to have a plan and then work out how we're going to deliver it?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to me there's been a constant discussion for all of my life, as far as I can remember, of getting rid of bureaucracy and middle management in the NHS. Again, the sort of casual, lazy headlines that are being attached to this particular policy decision is, you know, getting rid of the whole Rainbow Lanyard Brigade in the NHS and people like that. What do they do? The DEI hires. But you know, I just think that unless they're a sort of multi-term government, it's going to be a whole load of money paid on golden handshakes, on redundancies, and in 5 years' time, we could be basically reversing it all.
Well, it's your phrase, not mine, lazy headlines. But I do think there are a fair number of... I think, in fairness to the headline writers, the government were almost deliberately setting out to write lazy headlines yesterday. Keir Starmer wants to make the British state, not just the health service, but outside the health service, the British civil service, more efficient. Nobody can disagree with that objective, but you've got to have some ideas about how you're going to do it. It's no good just picking on the largest quango. I'm not a particular friend of NHS England. I'm not here to defend it. But just abolishing it doesn't make either the health service or the wider British state more efficient.
Yeah, I still haven't really got to the bottom of what it is they do, what it is they do that can't be done by the Department of Health. I mean, is it the allocation of budgets and resources? What do they do, Stephen? I don't...
Well, there is quite a difficult issue at the heart of this, actually, which is that every health minister from Ken Clarke in 1990 onwards, and indeed before him as well, but particularly when he was Secretary of State, I was a junior minister at the time, I tried to do it, and every one of our successors has had the same issue. But what we want to be able to do is set public health objectives, i.e. better outcomes, shifting resources into prevention, linking the health service more effectively with social care. The governments of all political complexions have said they're going to do that. What they haven't actually done is deliver it. And that's because policy is seen as being the preserve of the Department of Health. But actually, day-to-day management of a hospital isn't the core skill of a policy civil servant brought up in Whitehall. A big hospital is the size of a medium-sized public company. You have to run it. And to have a management team that's capable of running a large organisation. And those are two different skills, which is why we've always, before there was NHS England, there was a thing called the NHS Executive. There are two different things to be done here. One is setting public policy objectives and determining value for public money. And the second is the day-to-day management of very large organisations.
But then surely the hospitals themselves have their boards and their hospital management structures in place. So it brings me back round to the question of what does NHS England actually do?
Well, so there are different bits of NHS England. One part of it deals with the training programmes. Another part of it deals with the disbursement of resources. Another part deals with those hospital boards that don't deliver their budgets. You have to have, if you're looking after public money, you have to be able to intervene when an organisation isn't working, empower those that are, but deal with those that aren't. So there are routine issues that have to be dealt with if the NHS is going to be able to look the taxpayer in the eye and say, of course we can improve, but we try hard to deliver value for money.
Well, I'm beginning to see Sir Keir Starmer's point that stuff could easily be done on Whitehall, if I'm honest with you. But let's talk...
Yeah, I'm not sure. How many efficiency experts do you find on Whitehall? I'm a fan of the civil service, but efficiency experts are not to a penny in Whitehall.
Well, I don't think efficiency and Whitehall tend to go hand in hand very often.
That's my point.
You brought up something very interesting, actually, which is successive governments have failed to tackle the root causes when it comes to public health. That is something that Wes Streeting was very vociferous about when he first became Health Secretary. He wanted to talk about lifestyle medicine, about diet, about over-medication. What we've learned today is sickness benefits are completely out of control. More than 1.8 million people now on the highest rate of universal credit, compared to 360,000 just 5 years ago. So many people off work sick. A great number of those are off because of mental health. And we don't really hear what can be done to tackle this. We keep talking about the NHS and social care system being brought in together. We need to get more therapists, more talking therapists, and so on and so forth. My hunch is, and I don't know what you think about this, Stephen, if I happen to be Health Secretary for the day, I'd be saying we need to drill down into actually the lifestyle choices people are making, such as sitting at home, going down wormholes on social media and turning themselves into sort of balmy lunatics. And yet we don't seem to be having any conversation about why mental health is so bad. We just keep having a conversation about, well, we better make sure there are more people to treat people with bad mental health.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with the proposition that we should look more seriously, both at the number of people who are on long-term sickness benefits. There's a very important public policy question there, which is why Britain is an outlier in Europe. If you compare the position with before the pandemic, most other European countries have now got their people, the number of people on long-term sickness benefit, back roughly to the level that it was at before the pandemic. Ours has gone up by 50%. There's something wrong there.
What do you think it is? What is it? Is it because the system's too generous? Is it because we're just a really sad, miserable country? Like, what is going on?
Well, clearly, this is about the rules of entitlement that you were talking about with your previous speaker. It's also about the effectiveness of our public health system and the extent to which, as you quite rightly say, we emphasize people going into hospital and treating them in hospital because that's urgent, rather than preventing illness arising in the first place. And that's partly about mental health, but it's also about diet and lifestyle for people who have no mental health problems, but simply don't look after themselves in the way that a responsible citizen should. Now, those are quite difficult questions for a country that doesn't want a nanny state. But if we're paying for public health collectively and we want society to engage in supporting those who genuinely need help, then I do think that there needs to be some action taken to encourage, to prod. The nudge was the word, wasn't it, a few years ago, to nudge towards more healthy lifestyles, because actually that's the best form of healthcare, because it is virtually free.
No, exactly. I couldn't agree more, Stephen Dole. Fantastic catching up with you, former Health Minister there. Now, we're going to take a short break. When we come back after the break, I want you to tell me what is on your mind. Communal catharsis. I haven't said that for a while, have I? It's like your own little therapy session here after the break. You can phone me for free, basically, because it's your standard network rate, 0344 499 1000, and get stuff off your chest. You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp as well, or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. The number to text, 87222. Remember to write the word talk before your message. I'm back after this.
I was delighted to hear that the Financial Conduct Authority have just decided, taking a bit of a while, that they are no longer going to implement their equality, diversity and inclusion project. We know that that is a corrosive impact on workplaces. Why don't the government You know, if Starmer wants my kind of seal of approval, he could stand up and say we're going to get rid of every extraneous politicised role in the civil service, like EDI schemes.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, let's rattle through some of your messages and then we're going to hit up the phone lines now. Where someone says, sorry, Alex, what are you apologising for? It's Kevin from Newcastle, heading to Wembley this weekend. It was me who suggested your Newcastle top looks good. Well, thank you. I used to live in Newcastle, you know, I really did live in Newcastle. And I love it. That's when I started off my journalism career as a reporter for ITV Time Teas. So I'm a big fan of Newcastle. Could you get Nigel and Rupert Lowe to sort out their differences and get ready to lead the country? Now, let me address this face on, shall I? Oh, I have tried. I know them both. I've spoken to them both. And, well, do you know what? I don't really know what's gone on here. I've heard one side of the story. I've heard the other side of the story. What I do know is resolution is not on the horizon. What I do also know, though, is if you look at the polling of Reform, it hasn't really affected it. And I know this, you know, people out there might be listening who are huge reformists and know Rupert Lowe and think he's a great chap. But polling suggests that 75% of people who are going to vote Reform don't even know who he is. They've never heard of him. So you wonder how much of an impact this is going to have. I think it's really sad, actually, when you've got two brilliant men who are unable to work together. But I did speak to one Mr. Farage earlier. And he said to me, things are going to come out next week and the party will be exonerated. You will see why. Now, he didn't tell me anything else. But that's what he said. Just saying. So, you know, I'll leave you on that, hanging on that tenterhook because I can't give you any more information. But it's just so unedifying when people wash their dirty linen in public. But on the other hand, what we did see in the Conservative Party is just a huge amount of cover-ups all the time. Some really horrific behaviour. MPs accused of some of the most disgusting things. And it constantly being covered up. So when it comes to probity and discretion, we always say, don't we, that we'd rather our politicians were more transparent. If you've been getting your bins for free off Lord Ali, living in his house, are you? Pretending you're in lockdown at your wife's and you're not. We don't like that. We like things to be out in the open air. We want people to be held accountable. So perhaps we shouldn't moan when they are, but it does seem unedifying, all of this sort of back and forth that you've got. We live in this weird Twitter world now, isn't there, where people just can't go, right, that was yesterday's news, it has to be dragged on and on and on and on, and everyone throws in there too, but in comes Ben Habib with his big ideas, and you're just like, can everyone just shut up? Just get on with your lives. You sound like a load of bickering ninnies from a Mean Girls film. Would you grow up? Get on with your jobs, you're multi-millionaires, you should have more common sense by now. Put the egos in the dustbin and act like adults. Because when it comes to this, I'm sure one side is to blame, and I'm sure the other side's also to blame. I'm sure that blame can be equally proportioned, or maybe it's 75%, maybe it's 20%, fine, whatever. But you know what men do? They have a big fallout and then they buy each other a pint down the pub the next day. Or they have a big fallout and they don't go on like sixth form girls whining about it online all the time. What are you doing? No self-aware. Just stop it. These people are like, he said, I'm going to send you, I'm going to hold you. I don't do that because I think it looks stupid. There's plenty of things I can moan about that happens in my own private life. I prefer to just moan about the government instead, because that's what I'm paid to do. And it's blimmin' cathartic. But I don't go around moaning about everything else online and picking fights with people in the public domain, because it just looks utterly ridiculous. Can that memo just go out to everyone? I'm not talking about necessarily Rupert or Ben or Nigel, anyone here. You know, I'm just talking about all of the world. All of the world. I'm just sick to death of people having these stupid spats on X. It's tedious. It's ridiculous. It's time wasting, and nobody comes out of it looking good. Anyway, right, let's hit up the phone lines and speak to Andrew, who's in Hertfordshire. Hi, Andrew.
Okay, well done, Alex. Relax, breathe. You actually summed that up quite well. The reality is the polling, so what'll be will be. In relation to the benefits and the fraud in relation to it, this comes from a doctor, a friend of mine, who at the end of his education, he needed more money, so his friend got him a job working for the DHSS for people who are basically incontinent. So you would think someone that's had terrible cancer, our thoughts are with them. When they're actually finished the treatment, often they're left incontinent. Certain ethnic groups, and this is from a doctor, 3 have identified that if you go into the room for the assessment and you've not had a disease or an illness, heaven forbid, and you clear out to cloth, you immediately get full benefits. And he wanted to assess the people, and the people would clear out in the room would have to be shut and cleaned, and his mate got hold of him and said, look, the minute they walk through the door, tell them not to do it and just give them the money.
Wait, hold on a minute. Like, you were using the phrase clear out, and I'm there thinking, and I've just suddenly realised what you're saying. You're saying that people cheat the benefit system. They get on full sick because they go and wheel over the doctor's floor and then say, I'm incontinent. Is that what you're saying?
No, the doctor refers them to the NHS. They're going for full benefits because they're incontinent, and they get it because they walk through the door on the assessment and just clear out.
So clear out. I mean, it's 26 past 11 in the morning, so be careful about the phraseology you use. But are we talking about the release of human body fluids?
Yeah, that's right. It's exactly what I'm trying to say.
What?
And he said, and it's recent, it's within the last 9 months, he left, he did a load of work there, and he got some money and paid off some student debt from learning to be a doctor. He said, you cannot believe how many good people that have had cancer who get recovered, who come off the benefits, who should still be getting the benefits because they've got some issues in that area. But he said it is an epidemic that no one will confront. And it's just because no one can assess it. It's the same as the mental health thing. No one can assess it, so just pay it.
That is mad. So you're basically saying that we has become a weapon of war when it comes to cheating the benefit system. Spend a penny to get some quids. That's mad.
You're very witty. You're very witty, and you're really on a good one. I suggest you get yourself a big pint of cider and watch the rugby tomorrow, because you've been very good this morning.
Oh, thank you. Do you know, I'm doing breakfast tomorrow, so my alarm's going off at about 4 a.m, so I'm just going... And it's the start of the Formula 1 season as well. I miss all the stuff I enjoy through work. I don't get any money. Perhaps I know the solution. If I just sit here and... Yeah, I'm not going to do that. Right, OK, thank you ever so much, Andrew, in Hertfordshire. Let's speak now to Sandy, who's in Suffolk. I just can't get out. Before we speak to Sandy, can we just take a moment to just unpack actually what we were told there, that a doctor has said to Andrew that basically there are people who would deliberately go and have an accident, let's say, on purpose in order to claim benefits because they say they've got incontinence. And, well, you know, I'm going to prove it by... Speechless. I don't often get speechless. Right, let's speak to Sandy in Suffolk. Hi, Sandy.
Hello, Alex. You had a gentleman on earlier, a commentator or an expert or somebody as a guest. He said that cutting the winter fuel allowance only affects wealthier pensioners.
That was Christopher Snowdon.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Christopher Snowdon is a condescending, patronising plonker who doesn't know what he's talking about. He obviously doesn't know that if you're on basic state pension of £884.84 every 4 weeks, you're not eligible for pension credit or winter fuel payments. And I wouldn't call living on £884 every 4 weeks being wealthy. You know, some pensioners are still paying rent. They're still paying massive service charges if they're living in retirement flats. They're paying £300 or £400 in council tax and electric and gas bills. They're paying food on £884 every 4 weeks, and you're not eligible for pension credit or winter fuel payments if you're on that. And that is a fact. And he's come on the radio and he spread misinformation.
Well, listen, now Christopher isn't here to defend himself. Let me say that first. And I'm a fan of Christopher Snowden as it happened, but we are, as an individual, I like him. But this is the home of discussion, and it's really interesting to drill down into those sorts of statistics. £884 per month. So we're talking essentially about £21 a week, which when you boil that down, if you look at what the average fuel bill is to heat homes in winter these days, and when you look at the cost of food, and you're right, my grandparents rented until the day they died. They never owned their house. And so there are people who are going to be stuck, who really do think, can I afford to heat my home? I better. And do you know what? There's another thing we don't talk about enough is the amount of older people who are on meters. So my other half does up properties, and he's done up this beautiful old cottage, sort of thatched roof number in Wiltshire, and it's got an electricity meter in it, and a lot of pensioners still have electric meters. And the thing about electric meters is almost as if the energy companies go, well, because you can probably not really afford to pay your energy, we're going to put it at the highest possible price so you're not tempted to overuse it. Because it's staggering. When you've got one of those keys that needs to be topped up, you put it in the meter and then literally you do nothing. You boil the kettle and, you know, turn a few lights on, and within an hour, about 10 quid's gone. And you suddenly realise how blimmin' expensive it all is. So I really do take what you say to heart, Sandy, and I think that it's important, actually, when people come and talk about their real life experience and how this is impacting them. Sandy from Suffolk, thank you ever so much, and thank you for shining light on that and giving us some numbers to work with in that discussion. And apologies to Christopher Snowden, I don't think you're a plonker, I rather like you. Right, now, after the break, we just sort of career from one sort of failure in public services to the next. Oh, NHS, all the backlogs, let's get rid of NHS England, let's see if that works. Oh, winter fuel allowance, can't afford that. OK, fine, some pensioners are now going to have to freeze their bones off. And now we're told that prisoners are going to run out of space again at the start of next year. Again. What, we're going to have to release all the murderers and rapists while we bang up people for writing stuff on Facebook? Make it make sense. We're just in managed decline. And also, we're going to be talking about the sentencing body who's going to review the two-tier justice objections. This is after the Sentencing Guidelines Council took it upon themselves to say that, well, perhaps if you're of a minority background or a minority religion, you've got to have a softer sentence because boo-hoo, life's not fair. I mean, how ridiculous and racist is that? And then there's another proposal that paedophiles should lose their homes. OK, fine, I'm not exactly going to stand here and join Pi and champion their rights. But, you know, what's the plan here? Apparently, the UK should consider introducing laws to confiscate the homes of people who commit online child sex exploitation. And that's something that they do in Australia. Australia's Criminal Assets Confiscation Task Force successfully applied to the Supreme Court to have a 34-year-old paedophile's home with $375,000 Australian dollars forfeited. When you look at the statistics as to how many people are actually pedos in this country, the number is mad. We're talking well over 100,000. So what are we going to do? Set up some sort of Epstein Island for them all to go and live on? I mean, I'm not saying I want them to be treated with kid gloves and get away with it. It'd be great if we could put all 100,000 in prison, but it turns out there are no prison places anyway. So what is the solution? We're going to be talking to Vanessa Frake, former prison governor and author of The Governor, My Life Inside Britain's Most Notorious Prisons. That's coming up after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Don't mind me as I shuffle through my papers. Here we go. I should have done that during the break, but I was too busy telling Alicia how lovely her green jumper is. She's just come back from holiday in Thailand, and she looks gorgeous. She's got this amazing tan and this green jumper, and they're just like popping, girlfriend. Right, anyway, I'll tell you what is popping, and that is our prisons, because they're overflowing yet again. We've now been told that they're forecast to have to, release more wrong-uns onto the streets at the start of 2026 because they face total gridlock. Plans from 2021 to create 20,000 more prison spaces by the 2020s were completely unrealistic. Thousands of outstanding spaces are expected to be delivered 5 years late for £4.2 billion, which, of course, is 80% more than was planned. Where do you begin with all of this? Let's speak to Vanessa Frake, former prison governor and author of The Governor, My Life Inside Britain's Most Notorious Prisons. Now, Vanessa, we were told, weren't we, that we're going to have to review who goes to prison, who has a custodial sentence, and how long those sentences are, because we have a more punitive system than anywhere else in Europe. And yet, when I see the number of people being released into prison and the sort of acts they've committed and popping their bottles of champagne with their mates who turn up in their Bentleys probably bought by ill-gotten gains, I kind of think to myself, are these really the sort of people we should be letting out when there are people who have written a tweet and are banged up for, 33-month-long sentences?
Good morning, Alex. Yeah, it's a bitter pill to swallow, isn't it, really? I think our whole justice system is in national breakdown. And I think, the fact that they reckon by 2026 we're going to run out of places, I think is stretching it, to be honest. I would be surprised if it's not much sooner than that. We have shortfalls of places. The whole prison estate is in a state of disrepair. We have 23,000 cells that don't match up to the fire requirements as of March last year. And when the prison estate is full, there's no way to bring those cells into action because they're already being used. So we're up the creek without a paddle, quite frankly. Sorry, go on. As
someone who's been a former prison, who's been a prison governor, so knows the sort of people inside prisons and what you're doing, what you're not. Are there circumstances where there are people who you think, well, you've still got a year to go on your sentence, or 2 years, or 3 years, or 4 years, but actually you're just essentially a bed blocker, for want of a better phrase, because you're pretty much rehabilitated and you'd be far better out there in society earning money and not taking up a cell? Or is it the case that actually releasing any prisoners early is usually bad news?
Well, I think there is a requirement by the public that people are sent to prison as punishment. And I think that by releasing them early is detrimental to victims of crime. I think, this 40% of the sentence that's currently going on was expected to be a quick fix and last for a couple of months. But in actual fact, it's probably likely to last till at least 2029 because we are in the state that we're in. And, I think by July this year, I think we'll be seeing another load of prisoners released, getting into their Bentleys, etc.
Oh, you just think as well, it's about 10% of the prison population is foreign born, and you think to yourself, why are we putting them up at His Majesty's pleasure and, the taxpayers footing the bill, when surely it's easy to say, go home?
Well, yes, it is. And if only we could say that. It's the same as the guys who come across in the boats. It's very difficult to just sort of get rid of them. We have a thing in this country, the European Court of Human Rights, that the lawyers jump on the bandwagons, that they have appeals after appeals, and actually the only people that make any money out of it is the lawyers. And some we don't know what country they came from. Those that we do know what countries, some countries refuse to take them back, and we don't create any embargoes on those countries for not taking their prisoners back. So, you know, we're kind of stuck with a bill, and foreign national prisoners actually cost more to this country than our own prisoners. You know, we've got ourselves into this position, and it's going to take an awful lot. You know, the sentencing review of David Gork, which is due out late spring, will have some right shockers in it, and some right head turners on how we lock up people who we lock up. And absolutely, I totally agree with you. You know, some stupid comments on social media. Does that really require locking up people up? I'm not sure that it does, to be honest.
I think it very clearly does not. But we had figures out recently looking at the percentage of migrants or foreign-born people who commit crimes in comparison to the British population. I've very often gone down onto my favourite website, which is the Organised Crime Index. It's brilliant. I love it. I honestly just sit in the bath one day and go on that thing. It's fascinating reading. What you find out is about 90% of our organised crime in the UK is perpetrated by foreign gangs. It seems to me the more we get crime statistics in front of us, the more it's clear that a vast amount of our crime, I'm not saying the majority, but a vast amount, a disproportionately vast amount, has basically been imported. That when it comes to, you know, people who want to commit crimes, we're like some sort of, you know, El Salvador of Europe. Oh, come on here. Why don't you have a gang? Why don't you make a cannabis farm? Why don't you traffic women into the sex trade? Why don't you defraud our benefits system? Why don't, you know, like the blimmin' co-op on the road near me, all the meat is now in plastic boxes with security seals because people have turned nicking steaks into organised crime, loading them into vans and taking them back out to the Balkans. I mean, it's just, it beggars belief that I kind of feel like at the heart of all of this, as at the heart of so many other things, if we got realistic about who's in this country, who shouldn't be in this country, if we got realistic about who we let in, we might actually begin to see crime go down.
I don't actually disagree with you, Alex. You know, I think we've imported a lot of crime, a lot of criminal gangs that are now infiltrating prisons with drugs and drones and mobile phones, etc., because there's a lot of money to be made. And that, unfortunately, is the crux of organised crime, is making money. And, you know, as a society, we haven't dealt with it efficiently for the last 15, 20 years. And we're now in the position that we're in, where, you know, you go and see these gangs just sort of coasting through shops, looting it, basically, for want of a better word.
Yeah, it's absolutely mad. And people, you know, if anyone blimmin' says to me, oh, well, it's because people need food banks. It's not. They're nicking this stuff to sell around the back of your local takeaway, or they're nicking it, especially luxury goods, to put in a van to go and furnish a restaurant in Bulgaria. That is the truth of the situation. Now, before I let you go, I've got to put this to you, because Detective Chief Inspector Simon Welsh, who's the National Police Chiefs Council's Economic Crime Coordinator, said he was open to the idea of the UK following the example of the Australian federal officers who have started seizing the property of convicted paedophiles and those involved in online abuse. Now, certainly with the Hugh Edwards situation, people started having the conversation of why is he not being sentenced? Why is he not in prison? But if you drill down into the number of people out there who have, you know, are basically paedophiles, who have category A pictures on their phones, who, you know, partake in paedophilia, it's an eye-watering number. I don't have the number in front of me, but it's definitely 6 figures plus. And so you can't realistically put those people in prison when the prison estate is under 6 figures itself. So do you think this idea of seizing their property could actually work?
Well, I'm not actually sure. What do we do with them? Right. I mean, yes, great. You know, take their homes away, but we've got to put them somewhere. So in actual fact, we'll probably put them up in social housing or let them wander the streets. I mean, you know, I do wonder, you know, why Hugh Edwards wasn't given a sentence personally, but you know, I think there were friends in high places there, probably. You know, I'm not cheering on for paedophiles in any shape or form, but yes, take their possessions off them, take their home off them. But what do we do with them then? That's the issue for me.
Right, exactly. And like I said, what we're going to do, create some sort of Epstein Island and deport them all to it. Sounds pretty grim. I don't know what the solution is, but what I do know is that paedophilia and extreme pornography, like all other illicit industries, has a huge amount of foreign money being pumped into it. Vanessa Frake, thank you ever so much. Always great catching up with you. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere, because coming up after the break, if I can lick my finger and turn my page, we're going to be talking. Oh, here we go. This will cheer you all up. The UK Border Force is going on strike. Oi! Come one, come all. Get your boats ready. Pump up those dinghies, because there'll be nobody there to stop you. We're discussing that after this.
It just proves that these politicians are so naive. Because if I was the Chancellor, or if I was the Cabinet, and Man United came to us and said, "Oh, we're building this £2 billion stadium. Can you build the roads that we'll need?" I'd have said no. No, you want your new stadium, you pay for the roads, and if you don't do that, you can't have a stadium, can you? It's called business, it's called negotiation, but our government stupidly has rolled over.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back. Welcome back. Don't know what happened there. I was multitasking, reading text messages during the break, and it always leaves you a bit wrong-footed when you come back on air. Now, you will be delighted to know that Border Force staff who combat small boats crossings in the Channel are to go on strike. It's triggered by unhappiness at a delay in receiving allowances for their specialist roles. What's that? Picking people up and bringing them here. Border Force staff, the Border Force staff who man the patrol boats which intercept the migrants are going to go on strike in a move that could disrupt operations to tackle the crossings. Do you know what I'm actually beginning to think? Maybe these people going on strike's a good thing, because they won't be picking people up halfway across the channel and bringing them here. Maybe it'll actually slow down the number of successful crossings. Anyway, to talk about this more is Tony Smith, former head of UK Border Force. Tony, we've discussed this before, and you've said to me quite clearly that when the Border Force, intercept these people, they would like nothing more than to not have to bring them to the UK. They want to do their job as the custodians of our borders, but unfortunately they're told they've got to. Is this partly why, do you think, they're sort of going on strike, because they're also sick to death with government policy?
There's an esprit de corps in the Border Force, Alex, which you would only know about if you worked there. I was there for 40 years. It's a bit like the military, the police. I don't know, even if you journalists have got one. But they're a big family and they work together, they stick together, and it's pretty ropey out there. I was out there last year with the boats with them all. And, you are really working in some pretty dreadful conditions. People are coming on board, they're throwing up all over you. We have had dead bodies. And you've also got the expert teams that are trying to gather the evidence on the pilots who are ripping off their shirt and trying to dive down into the boat so you can't identify who the pilot was. You're taking pictures of them. You've got to get on board, do state. There's a lot to it, Alex. And they have been beaten up on pay, to be honest, over the years. They have not done as well as most of the other public service, public servants have, in other sectors. So you can see why they've got the I can understand why they've got the they don't want to go on strike, Alex. That's the bottom line. They really don't. They don't join the Border Force because they want to go on strike. They think they're trying to protect the border. They do protect the border, catch a lot of drugs, a lot of weapons. We do a lot of good stuff. But this boats thing, has hit the media big style. Of course it has, because it's an affront to public security. They bear the brunt of public criticism, and so I'm one of them, and I support what they're trying to do. And I think we should try and support what they're trying to do, Alex, because it is a really tough job that they're doing. And I wish you could go out there, with a camera and see what it's like, because it is pretty dreadful conditions that they're operating day in.
I tell you what, Tony, I would. If you've got any connections who can fix that up, I'm more than happy to go out with a camera and show what the Border Force are doing, because I think the public have a right to know what goes on. When it comes to these small boats and the situations that, the border staff are facing. And when you describe it like that, people throwing up dead bodies, I'm sure some people might even be violent, you also get the impression, actually, that the nature of the job has probably changed quite significantly from 10 years ago to today, when we have this illegal migration crisis. So I am sort of slightly sympathetic to people going, hey, 10 years ago, I might be opening the boot of a car and shining a torch in it. Now the game is completely different, and I haven't seen my pay reflecting that at all.
Yeah, well, we opened lorries. We didn't have boats in my day, thankfully, but we had a lot of lorries. And I opened lorries, or not me personally, but my teams did, and found dead bodies in there, in refrigerated lorries. We've seen lots of tragedies, all caused by human smuggling. And what the Border Force want to do is take the smugglers out and send the illegal immigrants back, which is what you advocate on your show, of course. That's what they really want to do. They can't talk to you, Alex. They're not allowed to. They have to go to the Home Office, press office to speak to you. And that's why I come out here and talk to you, to tell you how they're feeling, what's going on out there, and giving you the other side of the story.
Well, I'm pretty sure on that note, I don't think the Home Office are going to be tripping up over themselves to allow me and a camera to go on one of these boats and see what circumstances are like. Have there been any increase in Border Force staff? And we know the wages aren't really going up, but one thinks, given the sort of level of crisis we're facing, surely the staff numbers should have gone up.
Well, I think we need to call out some of these announcements. I mean, what happens really in reality is the deck chairs get shuffled. There ain't any extra new money. So you get an announcement, we're going to build a new border security command. You're going to have a crack team of caseworkers to deal with deportations, all that sort of stuff, which translates in reality into moving a bunch of civil servants or officers from one task to another. It does not mean whole rafts of new people coming into the job. Even when they do come into the job, recruitment's hard. Training's about a year just to get the basic training. And this all comes down to the CSR settlements that are going through now, Alex. I mean, we're now talking about 2.5% going to defence. You know what's going to happen there. All the other Whitehall departments, including the Home Office, are going to get squeezed. There'll be people in the Home Office now looking over their shoulders thinking, oh my God, can we afford the people we've got? How are we going to cut back? And I I can tell you, usually the border force and immigration enforcement are at the bottom of the pile, behind the police and security services for whatever reason. They will feel the brunt of this. They will not be a load of money, I expect, going anywhere near the border force immigration enforcement teams in this round. So it's a pretty tricky task now for us, I think, to work out, well, what kind of a border security team will we have? What kind of a border force are we going to have in 3 to 5 years' time? How are we going to cope with increasing pressures from international organised crime, not just from the boats, Alex, but from, synthetic opioids are coming in. We're getting more and more problems with firearms coming in. We've got the common traveller. This whole, I could spend all day telling you about all the problems you'd have if I was the head of the border force these days, which I'm not anymore. I just think, people just need to understand that the border force are really there saving lives. That's what they're doing. They did not join the border force to save lives, but they have to save lives. Because that's the legal environment they work under.
Right, let's actually pick up on that, because looking at this copy in front of me, I just want to bring something to your attention, because this particular report says that crews who work on the Border Force cutters last threatened to go on strike in 2022, and that was after the then Home Secretary, Priti Patel, said that they should be turning migrants' dinghies back in the Channel. The PCS, the union, said it was totally opposed to morally reprehensible pushback tactics, and Dame Priti subsequently abandoned the plans after the union joined forces with the charity Care for Calais. So there is something here that makes me think that it's maybe not as clean-cut as all border file. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? So is this sort of union-driven here because it's sort of been taken over by leftists, or is there a real reluctance because of the sort of horrible, ghoulish things that Border Force see to push boats back?
So there's two unions out there, Alex. There's the Immigration Service Union, which I was a member of, which was founded about 45, 50 years ago because the PCS were too politically left of the business. And a lot of Border Force officers said, well, I don't want to be in that union. They ask you when you join, which union do you want to join? And I did want to join a union, actually. I think most people do, but we got fed up with them. And actually I had a real problem with them during the Olympics. I don't know if you remember, but I was running all that stuff and they wanted to go on strike then the week before just to make things really, really hard for everybody coming to the Olympics. So there is a political wing at the top of the Public and Commercial Services Union that are in that bag you've just described, and that is true, and we need to be cognizant of that. However, I think the bulk of the officers on the ground, who certainly the Immigration Service Union, we didn't want to go on strike. We did have a strike agreement, but we didn't ever want to go on strike. The worst we ever did was work to rule, which would actually basically check everything and check everybody all the time, and queues would build up. That was the sort of industrial strategy under the ISU, and I think there is. You're right. There is a political wing in the civil service that is very left, that is disruptive, but I don't think that's what this is about, Alex. I think this is about officers who feel really, really hard done by. As I say, they've fallen behind other public sector workers. Some way they're doing a pretty tough job, and all they want is a decent deal, and I'm going to back them for that.
Yeah, I tell you what, Tony, I wouldn't want to be part of UK Border Force, to be honest. I don't think it sort of, looks to me like the most joyful occupation at the moment, with the mass waves of illegal migration and rubbish pay and the sort of things that you were describing. Tony Smith, former head of UK Border Force there. Now, before I go to break, let's read some of your messages. Rachel from Luton says, this is the third minister to go to China in 8 to 9 months. Is this another reason why our special relationship with the US is on a knife edge? And are we now so far in bed with China, you might as well call us Chinese? It is funny, this government does have a massive preoccupation with China. They yo-yo back and forth over to Beijing like nobody's business. It sends a chill down my spine. Jason from Lancashire says the government's forcing people back to work is a good idea in theory. However, the way they are going, there'll be no jobs for them to apply for. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? If you're putting all these taxes on business, increasing employers' national insurance, making workers' rights so brilliant that people can just go on the sick from the first minute of employment, the jobs are all going to disappear. Vinny says, Alex, why the turtleneck, you minx? Because it's cold, Vinny. I don't know if you noticed that summer's not here yet. It's a bit chilly, so there you go. I think that's a plausible explanation. I don't think I've trialled this one out on air before. I quite like it. Right, OK, going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere, because coming up in the final hour of the show, we're going to be talking about Putin's peace deal with Mark Francois MP.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us because, as you know, that's right there. That's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are not
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You again?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. Final hour of the show from me, Alex Phillips, here at Talk, the home of common sense. Now, coming up in the segment after this one, it's your opportunity to get in touch with your thoughts and your views on today's news. The number to call is 03444 99 1000. That's charged at your standard network rate. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp or indeed leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. If you want to text me instead, it's 87222. Remember to write the word TALK before your message. We're on X at talkTV. Right, now let's get on with it and speak about whether or not there will be a peace deal in Ukraine. This is after essentially Trump has managed to get Zelensky on side, the promise of having boots on the ground, but in a commercial sense from America, with the 50-50 rare earth minerals split. America says is enough of a backstop, a security backstop. And Ukraine has essentially agreed to a small ceasefire, a pause, an immediate 30-day cessation in fighting. And so now that's been put back to Putin. Quelle surprise. Putin said, well, you know, I like the idea in principle of not fighting, but I have all of these conditions, and those conditions include international recognition of the territory he's already captured, so basically keeping the spoils of his illegal invasion, crippling limits on the size of Ukraine's army, so essentially making sure if he wants to go back for more that Ukraine can't defend itself, a ban on NATO membership, Ukraine can't defend itself and nobody else can defend it. And according to Reuters, no foreign peacekeepers in the country. So basically nothing at all to deter him. Well, he does drive a hard bargain, doesn't he? It'll be interesting to see how Trump reacts to that. Let's get the thoughts now of Mark Francois, MP, because he is the Shadow Defence Minister. Mark, I think we've managed in the West now to come round to the conclusion that one thing that hasn't really been done until Trump came into the White House was talk about peace in Ukraine, talk about there being some sort of deal. Everyone seemed to rally against it and just kept saying more war, less jaw. But it seems at least Trump has sparked that conversation and he's managed to get Zelensky on side. Problem is, he's really going to struggle with Russia, isn't he? So what next?
Well, Zelensky offered a 30-day ceasefire after the talks in Jeddah. And so the ball was put into Putin's court. And it looks as if Steve Witkoff, President Trump's envoy, met with Putin last night in Moscow. He's now traveling back to debrief the President of the United States. And in short, it looks as if President Putin's basically lobbed the ball back over the net into Trump's court, because a Kremlin spokesman said a few hours ago they were cautiously optimistic about the possibility of a ceasefire, but there would be conditions. So these are classic Russian stalling tactics. And the risk here is that Putin is still advancing in eastern Ukraine. And if he thinks he's winning, he'll keep coming. And that's why it's very important that the whole of the West, including Britain, including our European allies, including the United States, is in no way naive about what Putin is up to and continues to stand up to it.
Do you think that this will now see a change in what seems to have explicitly been American policy so far, which is coming down like a ton of bricks on Ukraine and sort of leaving Putin out of it? Do you think we're now going to see a change in policy from the White House, or is that being rather too hopeful?
Well, President Trump said, I think, a couple of days ago that, if Putin did not accept this ceasefire, then, he was prepared to hurt the Russian economy. The implication was that he would increase the sanctions on Russia. And let's see whether or not President Trump will now follow that through. I mean, Lavrov, who's the foreign minister, I met Lavrov some years ago at the Russian embassy. He's a classic exponent of what you might call stalling tactics. And so Putin, it would appear, is paying lip service to the idea of a ceasefire because he doesn't want to enrage Trump. But he's come up with a whole range of conditions. So, of course, he wants a ceasefire, but not just yet. And the risk is he tries to string this out for as long as possible while still murdering Ukrainians. So it's very important, I believe, that the whole of the West, including President Trump, basically call his bluff.
How can we as a nation convince President Trump to do that? Because from what I've heard from an advisor to the Ukraine Foreign Ministry is we're only putting about 30% of possible sanctions on Russia at present. Why on earth have we not been putting more during the whole of the past 3 years?
The whole point about sanctions is in order for them to be effective, you have to do them collectively. So with our allies, we've stepped up the sanctions over a period of years. But, if the President of the United States were now to give a very clear lead, if he were to say, OK, I think Putin is deliberately stalling here, I'm going to up the ante and put pressure on Russia rather than just on Ukraine, then it would be very interesting to see what Putin's reaction would be. He is the aggressor. He invaded Ukraine not once but twice. Once in 2014 and again in 2022. He's the man that's been using cruise missiles to blow up children's hospitals in Ukraine. We've got to be very clear-eyed about who we're dealing with here. He's an ex-KGB colonel. He's not a Boy Scout. So now would be the time, I hope, for European allies to stand strong with Ukraine and for the President of the United States to follow up with what he threatened and to say that if Putin stalls, then hopefully the United States would react robustly.
What do you think's been going on here, Mark? Because I think that, one thing we in Britain need to understand is that the Ukrainian question has long been in contention in the Republican Party in America, because quite frankly, a lot of Americans go, where is Ukraine? Why are we sending all this money over to Ukraine? Then they also sort of go, oh, yeah, that Hunter Biden thing. And they didn't have dodgy deals with Ukraine. So really, on the Republican side of the argument, there has been very little sympathy for backing up Ukraine, particularly when Europe, frankly, wasn't doing enough. I think UK's been pretty decent, but certainly our colleagues and friends in countries such as Germany are very lily-livered about really cutting off Russia because, well, they've got their own political and economic reasons for that. But do you think that, as a result, if Europe is now making noises that it's going to increase defence spending, that it's going to, put its money where its mouth is, that Trump might be convinced to enter back into the battle? Because we did see that cessation of arms going to Ukraine for a while, and then that aid has started flowing back again.
Well, right, on Germany first, they just had a general election. They elected a conservative government, in effect, rather than a socialist one. So, and the new German Chancellor, Merz, is much more robust than all of this. this. So I think we're going to see quite a change in German policy on this. On America, I was part of a delegation a little over a year ago that went to Congress to lobby for the Republicans to pass the aid package, and we met a number of Republican congressmen. I remember one exchange, and he said to me very bluntly, this is similar to your question, Meg, why should I ask the people of my district to send their taxpayer dollars to Ukraine? And I replied, because the Baltic states and Poland are members of NATO, and it's better to send your money than to send your sons and daughters. So, history shows appeasing dictators doesn't work. Putin's a dictator. Xi's a dictator. If he's seen to win in Ukraine, Taiwan will become more at risk, because Xi will see that, if might is right and the West is weak, he's more likely to move against Taiwan. So there's a great deal at stake here. And I think Americans, including Republican congressmen, understand the history of some of this. And bluntly, if we don't stop Putin in Ukraine by helping the Ukrainians, we'll have to stop him in the Baltic states. And if we don't stop him in the Baltic states, we'll have to stop him in Poland. By then, you're into something that looks pretty akin to World War III. So better to stop him in Ukraine and back the Ukrainians to the hilt.
Well, do you support then Polish President Andrzej Duda, who's basically said a good deterrent might be if America decided to station its nukes in Poland?
Well, I remember reading an interview a few years ago, let me answer it like this, by the Ukrainian general who'd been in charge of the Ukrainian bit of what was the old Soviet strategic rocket forces. So he was the guy in charge of the nukes in Ukraine. And he gave this interview a couple of years ago, and he said, I pleaded back in 1994 with the then Ukrainian government not to give up our nuclear weapons. But instead, they signed an accord, the so-called Budapest Accords, which Russia signed, which we signed, and others. And that was meant to guarantee the territorial integrity of Ukraine. It was a solemn agreement. And then when it suited their purposes, whilst Ukraine had given up their nuclear weapons, they just marched in. So, you don't see many C&D badges in the House of Commons anymore. And all the more reason, by the way, for us to maintain our own strategic independent nuclear deterrent. So that the Ukrainians gave up theirs, and we saw what happened. So it's very important that the West improves, not just keeps up its defences, but rearms against what is a genuine Russian threat. I'm not scaremongering here. Putin's tank factories are working 3 shifts. The Russians are massively rearming, and we can't be blind to that, which is why I think we welcome the fact that the governments are increasing defence spending, and the other NATO allies look as if they're going to follow suit. There's a big NATO summit in The Hague towards the end of June, and it may be that at that summit the NATO nations collectively agree to increase defence spending, and that I think would be a very welcome thing.
Would you welcome as well what Sir Keir Starmer had proposed, which is British boots on the ground in some sort of demilitarised zone?
Well, we need to understand, I mean, we're very open-minded about that, but we need to understand what is the nature of the peace agreement, if there is one, that you're protecting. Once you understand that, then you can talk about what the military mission might be. And once you've agreed what the mission is, then you can start to talk about force packages and, what sort of military units you might deploy, whether you'd have jets in the air. But the first thing you need is to get a ceasefire. So we need to understand, if there's going to be a ceasefire, is Russia just stringing us along, or are they serious? And if they are serious and there's a ceasefire and they stop murdering Ukrainians, that'll be a good thing. And then would that ceasefire then lead to a permanent agreement? And if it does, which I hope it would, what are the terms of that agreement? And once you know that, then you can start getting into force packages and stuff like that.
Is there not a risk here that the only way to get some sort of agreement is to build Putin the proverbial golden bridge? He has to walk away with something. So whatever happens, he's essentially going to be rewarded for his evil invasion.
Well, there was a British admiral in the First World War called Sir Jackie Fisher, and he was the first Sea Lord. He famously said, ultimately, all nations desire peace, but peace on their terms. And what we cannot allow is a settlement that would allow Putin to claim victory, including to his own people. Because if we did do that, he'll wait a few years and then he'll come again, almost certainly. So any agreement that's reached, the Ukrainians have to be part of those negotiations. Otherwise, it's completely impractical. And it has to be something that shows to the world that Putin didn't win. All the more reason for us to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Ukrainians. Because, forgive me for repeating it, but it bears repetition in this context. Appeasement doesn't work. Our whole history shows us that time and time again.
Marc-Francois, thank you ever so much. Shadow Defence Minister there. I think the problem we face, frankly, is that, Putin's already holding a lot of cards, isn't he? He was able to continue his invasion unbridled. We've, without doing enough in the first instance, have backed ourselves into a corner with a war of attrition. And now Putin, people say, oh, will you stop? And he's like, all right, give me what I want and then I will. And I don't quite know how we get around that unless someone like America is prepared to wade in and smash a load of hard sanctions on them. But we've heard a lot of people say today that they might not always understand what Putin's up to, but Trump, he could change his mind in a moment, couldn't he? He could be quite mercurial. Zelensky is going back over to the White House. Maybe he'll turn around and go, he's a great guy. I like this guy. And then, turn his ire on Russia. I don't know. Right, we're going to take a short break now. When I come back after the break, it is time for your calls and your messages, and I can't wait to hear from you. So dial this number into your phone right now, 03444991000. That is the number to call. You can use that number as well to send me a WhatsApp message, or you can leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. I love those. 8722 is the number if you'd wish to text me, but you have to write the word talk before your message. I'm on X at talkTV, and I'm back after this.
Although there might be a good idea in there somewhere, this is just moving the deck chairs around. We haven't heard from the Prime Minister what he intends to improve patients by doing this. He hasn't set himself any targets or outcomes. It's just at risk of being a bureaucratic exercise. So and if you look at where Labour have done this already, where NHS England was never created, is Labour-run Wales, which has the worst waiting times anywhere in the country and the worst patient outcomes.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello there. Welcome to the show. It's time to hear your thoughts and feelings on the things we're discussing today. So if you'd like to give me a call, the number is 0344 499 1000. It's your standard network rate. You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp as well. You can text me 87222. Remember to write the word talk before your text, or we're on X at talkTV. Now let's read some of your messages. I think the deal has already been done. America, Russia and China all going to get a third of the planet each, and us working folk won't have any choice. We'll just have to go along with it. I only hope we get taken in by America. I've heard this theory being proposed by other people, this idea actually that America and Putin have sort of done a deal where they're like, all right, China's probably going to invade Taiwan, fine, you can have that bit of Ukraine, great, in return we want Greenland, and then you end up with these three supercontinents. I'm not sure whether that's just one big conspiracy theory. I mean, when you think about the fact that America is so diametrically opposed to China, and we know that Donald Trump is no big fan of China, I can't really sort of see that logically through to the conclusion. But you do have to wonder. I mean, I sort of think part of the reason why Trump has come down hard on Ukraine is because he can, because there's this awful bitter taste in America's mouth about how much this has cost, and it's all bound up with the whole Biden family as well. Let's not forget that. But is he now going to turn his focus and turn his guns, so to speak, on Russia? He said he will, and that could change everything. Right. Hi, Alex. You should never get that warmonger on again. He has an agenda. Are you talking about Francois there? Mark Francois? I don't know. Didn't specify which particular warmonger and what his agenda is, I'm afraid. Now, Mike from Lincoln says, we're proposing peacekeepers from other countries in Ukraine. Why wouldn't Russia propose something similar from their side? How about they're possibly agreeing to a ceasefire using Chinese troops? Sauce for the goose, etc. That would put the cat amongst the pigeons, to say the least. It would also give China its first foothold in Europe and the chance possibly to gain direct experience of Western troops, tactics and weaponry. Just saying. Well, we do know, don't we, that Russia was already using troops from South Korea. Not South Korea, wrong part of Korea, they're the good guys. From North Korea. North Korea, of course, is a big ally of China. So we do know there has been this sort of proxy battle with the anti-Western axis, which has sort of devolved into the use of each other's troops. Whether China would want to get its hands dirty, I don't know. They tend to play a more clever and tactical game than that. They like to sort of play both sides. They still want to sell their windmills to the UK. They still want to get their intel from helping us complete our infrastructure projects. They need to export a whole load of stuff around the world, otherwise their economy is on the brink of collapse. So I'm not sure that China would enter in that sort of agreement. But there is sort of conversations about India, about South Africa, about Brazil even, you know, the other BRICS nations. I'm not sure how many would want to put their peacekeepers in that scenario, but it is an interesting proposal, Mike. So let's bear that one in mind. Talking about the Border Force, Sharon says, how can they go on strike when they don't do anything anyway? I think, Sharon, the problem is they are overworked when you look at the levels of mass illegal migration we've got coming into the country. And by the sounds of things, what Tony was saying, it's a pretty gruesome job. Imagine going to work every day where you have to intercept these boats where there might be dead people, sick people, violent people who come on board and vomit. And the government's instruction is bring them back to the UK. You can't even execute your job properly. I wouldn't particularly want to do that role. It sounds like it's probably one of the worst jobs in Britain right now. And if your pay hasn't gone up and all of a sudden the nature of your responsibilities and the magnitude of what you face has basically increased by a factor of 10, then you've got to have a bit of sympathy, I suppose. If we're in their situation, would we also be banging the drum for better pay and better working conditions? Betty says, morning, Alex. If the NHS was run like a company, its directors and managers would have low base salaries, a minimal pension and big bonuses based on results, and they'd be sacked for failure. Change their pay package and the waste would stop overnight. I mean, you're sort of talking about this carrot and stick approach where we always say, don't we, when there's big failures in the civil service, when this project's been delivered massively over budget or not been delivered on time, or maybe we just see it all the time, mass failures, who's accountable? I mean, what happens to them? They just seem to stay in their jobs, and if they leave their jobs, they get a massive golden handshake, which just wouldn't happen in the private sector. If you've been rubbish and failed at meeting your objectives and have run a company into the ground, guess what? You're probably going to be struck off as the CEO or whatnot. Yet in the civil service and in public service, it doesn't seem to happen the same way. Tim from Suffolk points out that we don't have enough soldiers to even fill Wembley. And this is talking about boots on the ground. There's a huge problem in recruiting people into the armed forces at the moment. No one really wants to do it. The armed forces, meanwhile, are obsessed with putting into place a woke agenda and DEI hires and certain amounts of, well, you can't have all these white pilots because they're the wrong skin colour. Sorry, guys, you're going to have a payoff to not do your job. Oh, no, we don't have enough pilots. But also so many younger people just don't really have any connection to Britain because they've been told how rubbish it is, because the idea of being proud of your nation has been reframed as racist for too long. And they're also lazy and mentally ill, a lot of them, so they don't really want to get off their backsides. Would a good idea be to bring back some sort of national service? I don't know. I mean, maybe that's the best medicine for a generation who seem totally detached and may not have a work ethic. I'm not talking about all of them. I'm just talking in broad brushstrokes about some of them. Putin and his billionaire buddies have only one goal, and that's rebuilding the USSR. So any so-called deals will only be temporary while they rearm and do it again and again and again. Oh, I mean, Putin sort of says, no, this is just about the expansion of NATO. But then he does also go on these sort of mad tirades about the history of the Roman Empire. Darren, Gaz says, Alex Phillips, my talkTV eye candy presenter. Thank you. I agree with you on mostly everything. Unlike air shows, we have a lot in common. Are you offering me a date here? Might see you at Fairford then, Darren, in the summer. OK, right, that's enough of that. Now, before we go to break, I'm going to tee up my very special guest after the break. See if you can spot who it is.
Welcome to my beautiful home. What do you mean it's not my home? Every morning I pick beautiful flowers from my beautiful garden and I feed them to my beautiful children. So what if you haven't got a garden? I haven't really got any children. I hate bees. Get me out of this bee suit now. I've always loved taking something pretty ordinary and elevating it. You know, like my husband. It's so funny that people keep calling me Meghan Markle because it's Meghan Sussex now. It's Meghan Sussex. Meghan Sussex. Meghan Sussex.
Oh, well, look at that gorgeous character. I'm pleased to say that he, she, that, they, it will be joining me after this break. Don't go anywhere.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. Now, I hope you saw before the break. That's a brilliant clip from Meghan Markle's new show. You'll be pleased to know that she's now launching a new podcast called Confessions of a Female Founder. Just weeks after launching her first business, that's right. And this is after her Netflix series has received criticism. Her new venture, Confessions of a Female Founder, is going to be clearly some sort of tedious podcast where we get to be a fly on the wall as Meghan sits down for candid conversations with female founders and friends. Oh, I mean, I can't think of anything more excruciating. Kevin O'Sullivan, what are your thoughts on this? I bet you're champing at the bit to have a listen.
I've got my man's clothes back on, I hope you noticed. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, you know, with Love Meghan, you know, broke new ground in tedium. I mean, it plumbed new depths of boringness. The problem with Meghan is she has no idea how to be entertaining. She has no idea how to be interesting. Every time she opens her mouth, you want to fall asleep. She is so dull. It's just epic. So that's why With Love Meghan is failing, is because it's 8 episodes of sheer tedium. And now she's come up with this new podcast series, oh my God, called Confessions of a Female Founder, which frankly doesn't travel well. I mean, when I first saw that title yesterday, I thought, what, is this a fish or something? You know, we're supposed to understand that founder means someone who founds a company. Well, that may be accepted in America, but over here it doesn't really work. So they haven't bothered to look into... She's
a massive American industrialist. She's an entrepreneur of the first order, Kev. Explain to me what is different between Confessions of a Female Founder, some sort of rubbish curated fake podcast where she's going to sit with other women and talk about absolutely naff all. They're not going to be sitting discussing rape gangs and, you know, stuff like that actually really does matter to women. They're going to be talking about, and I get up in the morning and I have to look after my kids because I'm a mom, and then it's so hard during the working day because I'm missing my kids, and then I have to do all this, and aren't I brilliant? What is different between that and an absolutely rubbish podcast, Archetypes, which essentially failed because that was just her sitting down with a load of other women talking absolute nothing, talking a whole load of wokery and platitudes?
Well, exactly. Archetypes was a disaster because it was so dreary. I mean, she had a good guest list, Serena Williams, Mariah Carey, and so on and so forth. But everybody with an increasing sense of dismay realised it was people who were allowed to sit next to Meghan while she talked about herself. And that's the problem with Love Meghan. It's a succession of people who've been paid to walk into her kitchen and she'll give them food on the basis that they praise her first. Now, this new podcast series, Confessions of a Female Founder, is based on the preposterous proposal that she is a successful founder of companies. She's useless. Her companies are completely disastrous. So if she is going to sit down with genuinely successful female company founders, I hope she pays attention and takes some tips so that perhaps she could be quite a little bit less than catastrophic at starting her own company.
Who comes up with this absolute rubbish? Because even if Joe Rogan was to do a specialist series on speaking to women who had founded businesses, nobody would want to listen. No one cares if a woman's founded a business. People who found businesses are usually quite dull. You know, what are you going to talk about? Oh, well, you know, I employed my accountant and then I got a lawyer and then I had to put a staff base together. Then I packed a lunchbox. I mean, I can't see any merit in this.
Alex, there's a few videos out there along the same lines. As with everything else with Meghan, this is, you know, disastrously derivative. She just copies stuff, you know. Oh, I'll be Martha Stewart now. No, you won't. Now she's going to be sort of Richard Branson or someone. But a fair few successful tycoons do fairly successful podcasts like this. And they get quite a good audience. But this won't work because those podcasts are quite interesting and the interviewers know what they're doing. She, as you quite rightly imply, will take a kind of basically fairly boring subject. How do you start a successful business? And she'll make it even more boring. Trust me, no one will manage to stay asleep for more than about 3 minutes.
We'll manage to stay asleep.
Sorry.
Stay awake. You know, you're off. I can tell you're nodding off at the thought of it.
The only good thing about With Love Meghan is it's a cure for insomnia. This series of podcasts will be even worse. People will just fall asleep.
You know, they've actually commissioned season 2, apparently. She did some sort of post on Instagram where she's wearing a Netflix cap and she's wearing, the caption is, let us remain, like lettuce, remain calm.
Don't fall for that, Alex. They have not commissioned a new series.
Have they not?
No, they filmed 2 series at once.
Right.
And as soon as this series
they're stuck with it.
Unleashed upon an unsuspecting world, they went, "Oh, I've got a new series." She's acting like Netflix are so thrilled by the resounding success of With Love Meghan that they've commissioned a new series. No, they already had it in the can. They'll stick it out because it's cheap. With Love Meghan got 526,000 views in the first 5
Is that it? Internationally?
Yeah, internationally, all around the world, pretty feeble. When they released Harry and Meghan in 2022, that Britain-hating, slavery-obsessed documentary series, it got 2.1 million views in the same period of time, 5 days. So don't fall for the fact that With Love Meghan has been anything like a success. Every critic hated it, and if you go to TikTok, the hatred for it is off the scale. And of course, TikTok is where the young people live. So young people hated this. The only slight demographic that kind of seemed to be vaguely interested in how to make a ladybird-shaped canapé were the 45 to 54-year-olds, and no one in the entertainment industry gives a damn about that demographic.
Do you know, Kev, we should get together. I don't know if you've ever seen those sort of Pinterest fails where people have tried to make things that go horribly wrong. We should actually put some of these things to the test and make some ladybird-shaped canapés. It'd be hilarious. But hold on, I've got an idea. Why don't you and I, right now, become Meghan's management team? Because I know we're working with someone who's totally fake, who can't step out of her comfort zone. Everything's curated. Everything's going to be, I'm perfect. I always wear white. I never do anything wrong, even though I cut onions like I'm an idiot. But if we were to give her a series, what sort of things would we have her do? So first off, what would you do?
I've got it. I know exactly what she should have done with Love Meghan. If she's up for it, you and me, Alex, we can propose a smash hit show. It will go massive. It's this. What she does is she invites her father, Thomas Markle Sr., and her brother, Thomas Markle Jr., and her sister, Samantha Markle, who she has ruthlessly cut out of her life because she wants to be royal and posh, and she sees those people as too down-to-earth and too normal. She invites them to dinner or to lunch, makes them some of her relentless chopped vegetable dishes, and they sit down. That will be a smash.
I tell you what, that sounds like a job for Jeremy Kyle. Get those people who stop people lobbing chairs at each other. I'd love it.
And Meghan, there you go. That's a smash hit.
I think what would be quite fun is if she did, like, you know, inside high security prisons, or Meghan lives with the Amish or something. It'd be amazing. Don't let her out. Do aliens exist with Meghan Markle? I mean, she needs to get with the programme. No one wants to talk to a load of women who set up companies. That's just dull. It's dull on steroids.
It's a disaster. It will be even more of a flop than Archetypes. This woman just hasn't got a clue. She hasn't got a clue.
Now, before I let you go, Kev, I'm going to put you on the spot here because I want to get your thoughts on a particular subject, which is in Australia, apparently, a particular paedophile had his house stripped from him, a 34-year-old paedophile. It was worth 375,000 Australian dollars. That's about 180,000 in the UK. He had basically been doing the worst kind of paedophilia. He had downloaded all the most dodgy videos possible, and they said, right, this is how we're going to punish you. Well, apparently Detective Chief Inspector Simon Welsh, National Police Chiefs Council's Economic Crime Coordinator, said that isn't half a bad idea. What do you reckon?
I think it's a brilliant idea. I mean, you know, we've got to get, certainly in this country, right across the scale, we've got to get punishment sorted out. You know, people are getting away with the most appalling crimes now. I know our prisons are overcrowded, but that isn't the point. You know, we did a story the other day, I'm sure you covered it as well. Some guy, a prolific domestic abuser who has beaten up 11 of his partners, has been convicted 13 times for viciously beating up. His last offence was to bite the cheek. When the police turned up, he'd bitten the cheek of his partner, blood running down her face. He got 9 months, will do about 3 months. So, you know, we need to toughen up our punishments generally, and if taking away the houses of paedophiles, why the hell not? And while we're at it,
where are they going to go though? If we've taken away their houses, are we then like putting them up in the hotels with the migrants or something?
No. We take away the houses and we put them in prison for, I don't know, 50 years or something like that. Why is Hugh Edwards walking the streets of Wales right now? It's a disgrace.
There you go. There's an idea for Megan. Megan the pedo hunter. That would be a blimey. I'd tune into that one.
We're coming up with brilliant ideas.
Honestly, they should get us on the board of Netflix. We've got all the most genius creative plans. Now, before I let you go as well, apparently that Sentencing Guidelines Council is going to look again at the arguments against its new guidelines after critics said it's two-tier. Two-tier is basically saying if you're non-white and non-Christian, you have a softer sentence.
Yeah. I don't believe Shaban Mahmood and the government that this blindsided them. They didn't realise. The sentencing council is so independent. We can't do anything. You're the damn government. You govern the country. Of course you can do something about it. I'd get in touch with the sentencing council if you really want to do something, Labour, and say, look, you change that. You get rid of that official enshrining of two-tier justice, or I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to axe the sentencing council. How's that? That's what they should be doing.
I think they really welcome these guidelines because they probably secretly like the guidelines, but then it's given them the opportunity to say, we don't like the guidelines, we hate two-tierism. And then what will happen is, because they're an independent quango that Labour do really like, despite saying we're getting rid of the world's biggest quango, they'll just keep in place their sentencing guidelines anyway. So win-win for Labour.
It's exactly right. It's exactly what it is. Or quietly, secretly, Labour fully approve of this enshrining of two-tier justice because Labour and Keir are the party of two-tier justice. He's not called two-tier Keir for nothing. It is a scandal and something should be done about it.
No, I totally agree. Now, before I let you go, Johanna in Salisbury has said, hi Alex, Megan's new podcast for Lemonade Media is already doomed. She's having copyright concerned. It's similar to Spotify's Confessions of a CEO, another copycat idea. Although with Confessions of a CEO, that geezer kind of introduced interesting people. It's not like, I'm just going to talk about woke stuff with woke people. He actually, drills down into some interesting chit-chat, not about business. Why would anyone listen to Megan talking about starting a business? She doesn't even know what her own surname is. It's Windsor. Actually, I don't know what her surname is.
Windsor, she wants to know what her real marital name is. It's not Sussex. But in terms of her podcast, yes, it will fail because, among other boring things, it will be very woke. Here's an interesting fact. So that other queen of wokery, Michelle Obama, she's released a new podcast series. Guess what? This most revered woman, the most popular woman in America, her podcast has disastrously flopped. In the first week, it got 19,000 views. My show, What Just Happened, gets about 250,000. So, Michelle, your wokery is not required, nor is Megan's. Wokery is dying in America. Please, can it die here too?
It's tedious, that's why. Now, Alan in Liverpool says, is it just me, or does Kevin O'Sullivan look quite fetching in his plum-coloured dress and wig? It's okay, I've had a stern word with myself. Brilliant video. I almost choked on my tea this morning with laughter. Now, it turns out a load of people are choking on tea up and down the country because Nicola says the same. There should have been some kind of warning before Kevin's appearance on Netflix. I literally spat my tea all over myself. Kevin, what is it with you and people spitting their tea out?
Well, the thing is, here it is. Alex, that I really, really love myself. But also, I mean, I kind of almost fancy myself now. So, I'm going the whole hog. There you go.
Oh, my God. Kev's transitioning. It's like a headline news. Kev, he's put on that wig, he's put on that dress, put on the fake boobs, and he suddenly sees what the Trans Lives Matter stuff all about. He's going to be getting a placard out and joining the movement. Oh, Kev, my darling, it's so good catching up with you. I miss you. I miss you to the bone. The wonderful Kevin O'Sullivan, my former TV husband. Not so much my TV ex-husband. We're just having a trial separation. I'm sure we'll get back together at some point in the future. Well, after all of that hot air, we're going to be talking about some more, because Ed Miliband's been flying to China with a climate cooperation on the agenda, as if Xi Jinping's going to go, well, now Ed's turned up with his ukulele, I better get rid of those coal-fired power stations. Let's discuss the lunacy of it all after this.
Although there might be a good idea in there somewhere, this is just moving the deck chairs around. We haven't heard from the Prime Minister what he intends to improve for patients by doing this. He hasn't said himself any targets or outcomes. It's just at risk of being a bureaucratic exercise. So and if you look at where Labour have done this already, where NHS England was never created, is Labour-run Wales, which has the worst waiting times anywhere in the country and the worst patient outcomes.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello there, welcome back. I'm sure you will be delighted to know that the UK government is on its third little trip over to China to hang out with our best mates in Beijing. This time it's to convince them that they should also join the Net Zero Nutters Club. Somehow I don't think it's going to work. Ed Miliband is flying over to appeal to China to back international climate change commitments. This is after Trump's decision to pull out of the Paris Accord. Now, let me have a little think here. So Trump is no longer going to self-flagellate at the altar of climate crisis. He's no longer going to destroy his own industry, and instead he's going to make a load of money for America by doing drill baby drill. And the genius that is Ed Miliband thinks he can go to China and go, well, you know, now America's going, you know, great guns on its economy by getting rid of all this climate nonsense. Perhaps you'd like to do the opposite. I mean, seriously. Has he gone mad? Let's speak now to Ralph Scholhammer, political theorist and professor at Webster University in Vienna. Ralph, it's always good to have you on the programme. I mean, what is going on here? Labour has apparently made improving ties with China one of its main foreign policy goals. That's despite all of the espionage, the human rights abuse, the fact that we know that they basically have malign intentions. I can't understand it.
Well, I don't blame the Chinese. I think they have understood very well that the two knives that are being plunged into the heart of Western civilization is environmentalism and mass migration. And the Chinese use whatever tools they have at their disposal to kind of keep the West continuing this, this ride towards the cliff, and hopefully we'll go over it from the perspective of Beijing. Because if you look at the current British government, and this is perfectly embodied by Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband, I mean, pretty much every policy proposal they have is conducive to the suicide of the UK as a middle power, or whatever you want to call it, and it's finishing off what was once left of a great civilization. It's I have to admit, it's tragic to observe.
But is the Labour government so stupid that they don't get this, or do they not care? Because it's obvious, isn't it, that what would suit China most in the world is for our industries and our manufacturing to keep going into decline, because they then get to sell more stuff to us. And they've got their own big economic problems. They've got a property bubble that everyone says is going to explode next week. They've been saying that for years. And China doesn't care about net zero. In fact, they're profiting so much from it, not only by seizing up all the rare earth minerals and all the stuff people need to put batteries in EV vehicles and solar panels and make windmills and all the rest of it. So they're making a load of money out of doing the manufacturing for net zero while not following it themselves. And Ed Miliband going over there is basically going, can we have more of your dastardly plan, please? I mean, surely the Labour government get that.
No, I don't think so. I think the misunderstanding we have, and this is of course especially true of people like you and I, Alex, because we see the world so entirely different than they do. But whether it's the Greens on the continent or whether it's Labour in the UK, they don't think in national terms, right? I don't think that Keir Starmer gets up in the morning and thinks, what's the best that I can do for Britain? What's the best I can do for the UK? I mean, he said it once in an interview himself, that Davos matters for him more than Westminster. So this is not me putting words into his mouth. These are words coming directly from his mouth. And I think the same is true about Ed Miliband. He doesn't care about the well-being of British workers. He follows this weird idea of saving the planet, saving the climate, saving whatever it is. And the last people on that long, long list are the actual people of Britain. I mean, this is something we had these conversations now for almost 3 decades, and there's still too many people out there who think that the political left, embodied by people like Starmer and Miliband, really care about the British people. They don't, whether it's the environmental policies, whether it's industrial policies, or whether it's migration policies. And I think it is time, by the way, the same is true with politicians on the continent. So I'm not trying to pick on the British here. This is a problem all over the West. But it's really time for people to wake up. And I think we're still hitting the snooze button on the alarm. And at some point, you can no longer hit the snooze button because it's too late.
I mean, how deep into Europe is China? Because at some point they had a lot of sort of, fingers in pies in places like Montenegro in Eastern Europe, and then as far down as Italy. I mean, how bad is the problem with Chinese infiltration into vital infrastructure on the continent?
Well, there's an old saying, which is that if there is mush, you push. And the Chinese have understood that in many areas of the West, there's a lot of mush. So they are pushing, which makes a lot of sense. And one of the issues that the Chinese do very well, and this is something we have to admit, if they want to do something, they do it. They have problems with corruption. They have problems with debt. Like, not everything is golden in China. But if the Chinese Communist Party, if the Chinese state, if they set their minds to doing something, usually they accomplish it. And if they say they want to infiltrate, whether it be via TikTok, whether it be via infrastructure projects or anything else of that kind, they want to infiltrate parts of the West, then they do it. And they have been doing so quite successful, because the difference between the West and the Chinese is that the West likes to talk and the Chinese like to do. And of course, this has consequences.
Now, it's very clear, as you know, J.D. Vance pointed out at the Munich Security Conference, that Europe's own worst enemy is largely Europe, and on it goes and goes and goes, with the sort of parties that people go, oh, these could be the solution to the problem, being blocked out of democracy. Before I let you go, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, you might not have this particularly in your portfolio, but what on earth's going on in Romania? Because they've had their presidential candidate there blocked, who was, you know, kind of considered to be of the woke right. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Why is he not able to stand?
Well, I think it doesn't matter if he's a good guy or a bad guy, because that decision is supposed to be made by the Romanian people and nobody else. And the odd thing is, now there are all these claims by the Supreme Court in Romania why he cannot run. He's xenophobic, he's an anti-Semite, you know, he's pro-Russian. And let's assume that is true. That was already known in December of 2024 when he ran for the first time. So it's a little bit odd that nobody had a problem with him participating in the election until he was winning. And this is, of course, what the Romanian people also realize. And he got 22% in this first round of the election. In current polls, he's at 44%. Because, of course, most people in Romania say the same thing. They say, if you want to ban that guy, you had to ban him from the beginning. You cannot just ban him once he's winning. But that's the same thing that we see happening with the AfD in Germany, or, by the way, also with Marine Le Pen in France. There is now this trend, and this is why I'm very worried about Romania, because this is basically a dry run for what could happen in other places, that if the right is really starting to win, you simply try to ban them from participating in elections.
Do you reckon that could even happen here in the UK? Because what we're seeing in Poland, despite the internal spat that's happened in recent weeks, is Reform is polling equal with Labour. Let's see how things go. But if we're in a situation where Reform looks like it's going to form the next government, we have seen local elections in the UK coming up in May. 9 of those authorities cancelling having the votes because, oh, well, you know, they need to restructure. Do you reckon there'll be dastardly deeds to stop any Reform victory here in the UK, or would we not go that far?
Well, I'm an unassimilated foreigner, so I'm in no position to tell the British how to vote or give any recommendations. But my fear is that Reform's biggest problem is themselves. I know I'm very fond. I think that many of the accomplishments by Nigel Farage deserve our respect and are to be commended. But at the moment, I'm not sure if he's really capable of leading a movement to really turn British politics upside down. I'm very worried about the thing with Robert Lowe, with Ben Habib. So there's something going on within the party that is not healthy. And as somebody who knows Nigel very well once said, I don't know if this is true, that everybody, the better they know Nigel Farage, the less they like him. Again, I don't know if that is true, but at least this is what some people say. And I know that's also a horrible thing to say, that some people say.
Well, do you know what? I know him really well. I've known him for 20-odd years, and I'm very awfully fond of him still to this day. But you are right, they're not exactly making their own lives easy right now. Ralph Schulhammer, it's always great to catch up. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Hello, Ian.
Hello.
Hello. Do you know what NHS England does?
Or did.
Or did,
yes. You mean as a general rule? What
do you know what they
is?
do? Yeah. What sort of things do they do? Like if someone says, what do you do as a teacher? You go in, you have a lesson plan, you stand at a desk, you put people in detention, I haven't been able to get to the bottom of this. All this, we're going to get rid of it. I'm like, what does it do?
But it's obviously they administer, and then you say, well, what do you administer? And they'll say stuff.
Yeah.
Like medical stuff.
Yeah, we're in charge of working out budgets to hospitals. OK, so then what does Whitehall do?
I mean, I do get the West Streeting remark that it's the world's biggest quango, I think is probably true. I mean, it seems that it was set up with good intentions to try and separate the whole politics out of it. I'm not really sure you can do that fully, although I don't trust this particular government to sort out the politics.
World's biggest quango is the UN. That's what I reckon, anyway.
Oh, that lot. I mean, that's a whole other story, isn't it?
I love that. Where did the bonfire of the quangos go?
You see, a UN judge just got convicted for having a slave in a house. I mean,
you couldn't make it up, could you?
Unbelievable.
Do you know what quango stands for?
Is it actually an acronym?
Yeah.
Are you going to give me the acrostic?
Yes, so it's actually a quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organisation.
That's the one.